Good evening, everybody. I'm Councillor Lynn Doherty, the leader of West Berkshire Council and chairman of the executive. Welcome to this meeting. I'm being supported by my deputy leader, Councillor Graham Bridgman. The other members of the executive present are Councillors Steve Arderwater, Dominic Bowick, Hilary Cole, Ross McKinnon, Richard Sumner, Joe Stewart and Howard Wollaston. Members of the shadow executive and the leader of the minority Green Party are in attendance. These members are entitled to speak and ask questions when invited to do so by myself. Other members of council are also in attendance in the virtual waiting room and can ask questions on any item included on the agenda. They will do this by indicating electronically, and I will then invite them to be brought in from the virtual waiting room for their questions to be answered. Members who are not on the executive are not able to vote on any of the agenda items. There are also a number of officers in attendance, and they include the executive directors, Sue Halliwell, Joseph Holmes and Andy Sharp. Sarah Clark will be the legal advisor to the meeting, and I am assisted by Linda Pye, the clerk to the meeting, and Stephen Chard, who will be acting as the Zoom host. Before we move on with this evening's meeting, I think it would be remiss of me not to reflect this week following a National Day of Reflection on Tuesday, which marked 1 year since the first lockdown due to the COVID pandemic. I know for many people that would have been a sad day where they remembered loved ones, and I wanted to pass my condolences and say I too shared that reflection, as I think everybody around the country did. As we look now towards the coming year, we know that COVID will necessitate changes in focus and additional work in certain places. And we will hear more about this in May at our AGM, when I will be presenting our council refresh. However, this work does not wait for our governance timetable. And what is very apparent with the NHS Reform White Paper, working together to improve health and social care for all, is that this will be an area of greater focus for us all. In order to achieve this within West Berkshire, this evening I am announcing a change to some roles of the executive, which will take place following this meeting. Councillor Graham Bridgman will move into the role of Health and Wellbeing Portfolio Holder. Councillor Joe Stewart will replace Graham as the Adult Social Care Portfolio Holder, and Councillor Howard Wollaston will move into Internal Governance, taking with him for the time being Sports and Leisure. I believe this change will enable West Berkshire Council to best be able to respond to the changing and demanding needs of our health agenda. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all three for their contributions to date in their current roles. But it would be remiss of me not to single out Councillor Graham Bridgman, who has been portfolio holder for adult social care since May 2018. In this time, he has not only developed a detailed understanding of how adult social care works, but has ensured investment into the service to meet model demand and advocated tirelessly for those most vulnerable members of our community. All of this has been done at the same time as being my deputy, and in this last year being part of the team here in West Berkshire working directly on our response to COVID. So a huge personal thanks from me for this, and for agreeing to take on what I'm sure is going to be a very complex but hopefully rewarding piece of work. I'd like to wish all three every success with their new roles. I'm now going to hand over to Linda Pye to ask for some reminders about the way we conduct council meetings via Zoom.
Members, standard Zoom reminders are now being shown on the screen. In addition to those points, please note that the raise hand button has been moved to the ribbon at the bottom of your screen. If it becomes necessary for any members to telephone into the meeting, you won't be able to signal to speak. So once everyone who has raised a Zoom hand has spoken, the leader will be asked to invite anyone who has telephoned in to speak in order. Any voting necessary will take place by a physical show of hands. And if we need to adjourn the meeting at any point, the leader will adjourn and will advise the executive of the revised time and date of the meeting. If it is a short adjournment, you'll be able to rejoin this Zoom meeting. Otherwise, a fresh appointment will be sent out. Do members have any questions about the way in which the meeting will be conducted before we proceed? Thank you.
I see no hands raised, so thank you for that, Linda. Therefore, we can move to item 1 on our agenda this evening. Item 1 is apologies. Do we have any apologies? Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. It wasn't an apology, so I wanted just to welcome your comments, obviously in terms of the day of reflection. I think that for us and our family, you know, we were trying to look forward as well. And actually, I think that day of reflection it allows that to happen. You know, it's been a terrible year, and whilst we disagree on policies, you know, actually, I've said it to you in private, and I've said it to Graham in private. I should say it in public as well, which is thank you, both of you two, for the hours that you've put in to managing the council over the last year. As I said, I know that we can disagree sometimes, but in terms of members of the community, you know, committing the amount of hours you have done to help shape the district's response, I think that everyone should be appreciative of that. So thank you on behalf of the opposition. Thank you, Councillor Dillon. Your words are very much appreciated, and I very much like to think it's a team effort, but it's very much appreciated you saying that. And I agree. I think there was also that element of hope in that day of reflection, because I think it made everybody reflect on how much work has gone on and how our communities have risen up to that and given us real faith in humankind, really, and doing the right thing going forward. So I agree entirely, and thank you for your kind words. Moving back to apologies, Linda, do we have any apologies?
From Nick Carter, the Chief Executive,
who is taking a very well-earned break at the moment. So another person that's been instrumental throughout the last year and is having some time off. So I think we'll accept his apologies this evening. Okay, can we move to item 2, which is the minutes? Can I ask if anybody had, well, before I do so, can I ask, I'm quite happy to propose these minutes from the chair. Can I ask for a seconder for the minutes?
Happy to second, Leader.
And before we take a vote on that, can I ask if anybody had any issues or concerns they would like to raise with regards to those minutes? In which case, please can I ask executive members to indicate by raising their actual hand if they agree that the minutes can be signed as a true and accurate record of the previous meeting.
Thank you, Leader. I think that is carried.
Okay, I was waiting for you there.
Apologies.
I wondered if I was missing something. I hadn't seen something. Okay, thank you. In which case, can we move on to item 3, declarations of interest? Can we ask if anybody has any declarations of interest on this evening's meeting? I can see Councillor Cole's put a hand straight up. Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Leader. With regard to public question F, I just want it to be noted that I am a member of the Newbury and District Agricultural Society, but that doesn't preclude me from answering the question. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Cole. And I can see Councillor Wollaston.
Thank you, Leader. In respect of item 8, as local ward member, I have been heavily lobbied and believe that I may have a conflict of interest. I will therefore take no part in this item and will abstain on the vote.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wollaston. That's noted. Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Just in relation to the housing strategy papers, obviously I'm not a voting member of this body, but I work for a registered social landlord.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dillon. I don't see any other hands up. Councillor Wollaston, I take it that's an old hand, and therefore we can move on to a notice of motion. So I've actually introduced a motion myself this evening, and before I talk to that motion, can I just ask if that motion will find a seconder this evening?
Just located my unmute button, Leader. Yes, it does.
Okay. The motion that I've actually tabled for this evening, the motion before you looks to create a new member champion role for safer streets. While West Berkshire currently has a low crime rate, recent national events bring into sharp focus the need to ensure our streets remain safe and public anxiety with regards to this issue is addressed. Currently, the West Berkshire Safer Community Partnership is the main body that looks to create a safe and healthy community here in West Berkshire through encouraging adoption of appropriate safety measures. The champion role would look to work alongside this partnership and energise its work to focus on the current concern of street harassment, to enable us to work collectively towards a shared vision of what safe streets feel like here in West Berkshire. The champion can act as a driving force to gather views from the community and turn these into potential actions that will help everyone to feel safe. I feel by bringing this motion before you this evening, my aim is to be able to put our recommendations to our full council meeting, our AGM in May, and to name a champion at that meeting to take forward this important piece of work. The motion is self-explanatory, but really the executive is proposing that the council creates this champion role so that we can have somebody who works with our communities, works in partnership with Thames Valley Police, works with all of those partners involved in the community safe for partnership areas, and also develops better public awareness of what street harassment looks like and unacceptable behaviours. To do this, we would look to also work with our local members of parliament, and I can confirm I have already had conversations with our Newbury Member of Parliament, Laura Farris, and that Laura is planning to hold a roundtable session event to kickstart some of this work next week. And I understand her office will be doing some promotional activity around that, but we as West Berkshire Council, through myself, will be taking part, as will Thames Valley Police. So the motion is set out before you. The reason it's here tonight is because we can't bring motions to our AGM, but I felt that this was really important that we actually create this role ready to kickstart from the new administrative year. So I hope it will find everybody's support. I'm happy to take any questions and I'm happy to leave it there or hand over to Councillor Bridgman. So Councillor Bridgman, do you want to come in there?
Well, I'll reserve my right, if I may. Let's see what other members have to say.
Okay, Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. There is nothing in this that we disagree with. I think what we were surprised about is the mechanism to make it happen. So coming to the executive and then almost shoehorning around the constitution, because motions can't go to the to the AGM in May, but we could have just held a special meeting either before the AGM or after the AGM where members could then properly debate it. And so I think a question to you really, or to Sarah through you, Leader, is if the executive approved this tonight, is all that is needed for the council to create the champion, or would full council have to vote on it?
We're making the recommendation. The full council would have to vote on it, Councillor Dillon, is my understanding. We're making that recommendation to full council, and the timing is very much around, obviously everybody has felt the impact of Sarah Everard's death. It felt very timely at this point where anxiety is high around street harassment to bring it forward. I looked into the constitution and understood that we could bring a motion to executive to enable us therefore to take that vote at full council. But I'm sure Sarah will correct me if I've said anything incorrect there, but it does mean that when we name all other champions at full council this in May, we'll be able to include this new post within that, which is why it's been done in the time that it has been done. And I'm quite happy for us to have a discussion about what that might look like at full council. It's just we're very constrained by what we can't present that motion in full.
Okay, and then my only other comment, Leader, is forgetting the subject matter, which is vitally important. Again, it feels like that the council's constitution is being bent for the will of the governing party. If I wanted to put down a motion to the AGM, I wouldn't be able to, and you're using your executive functions to be able to do that. Now, as I said, in this particular instance, it's a good suggestion that you're coming up with. But given the feeling in council around how motions are navigated through and time delays, it does feel like if the administration want it, we can get it quick. If the opposition want it, then it takes a year to go through the process. Sorry, but that's just the feeling that my group's expressed to me, and I would agree with that.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Councillor Dillon. Sarah, before I go to Councillor Pattenden, I have correctly stated how that will happen at full council, haven't I?
Yes, so this will become incorporated within the recommendations for members to consider as part of the allocations of seats. So that is a report that's seen every year, and one of the appendices includes kind of the appointments of the council's champions. So this will be incorporated as part of that report if passed through this evening.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pattenden.
Thank you, Leader. I wonder if you're able to share with us any idea about how much resourcing will be behind this new role, in terms of how much effort do you think would be involved and how much revenue would be involved?
Well, it's a member champion role at this point, Councillor Pattenden. And there is already a safer community partnership working with all of those partners that would need to be involved. And as the motion states, we need to actually go out and understand from our communities what might be required and what might not be required. So at this point, it would be impossible to actually answer that question because I don't know what will come back from our communities as to the level of concern. I certainly know that we're looking at street harassment from across the piece. There's many different areas that we would look to focus on, but we're not going to dictate to the public. We're very fortunate here. We have very low violent and sexual crime rates. We're far below the sort of southeast average or the national average. But what's concerning is while that's low, obviously there is anxiety out there, but we need to actually go to our communities and speak to our communities. And I know, having spoken to Laura Farris, that she's had a number of constituents contact her direct to talk about particular areas of concern. So until we've done that initial piece of work, there is no opportunity to say what it would or wouldn't do, and if it would be outside of the current remit of the Safer Communities Partnership, I'm afraid, Councillor Pattenden. Okay, any other questions? In which case I'm going to go over to Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, this is obviously going to have some links into and work with the Building Communities Together partnership, and that falls within my new portfolio. So I'm going to take an interest in this and hope to see those relationships develop and work. I mean, I think that the member role here is the messaging piece. We need to get the messaging out, and I think having a spearhead for that messaging will serve us in good stead. And I understand the concerns of Councillor Dillon with regard to the constitutional piece. He'll know as well, that I take an active interest in the Constitution, Councillor Dillon, as you know. And we did think that this was the way to get this moving in the timescale that we have, given that we're coming up to the annual meeting of council, and that's where all of these things really take place. I mean, we can do them at other times, but that's the obvious place to do it. So I fully support this motion. I'm very happy to second it, and let's see how the vote goes, I wonder.
Thank you. So we would like to move the motion in our name. Sarah, we don't need to take an actual vote on that according to my briefing, is that correct?
Yes, so it can be because it's being referred to council for a decision. So that's you can in effect direct that this now proceeds to council.
Okay.
Well, I stand corrected. I stand corrected. Okay,
in which case we would like this to proceed to council. Thank you, everybody. Can we move on to item 4, therefore, in our agenda this evening, which is our public questions? I'd first of all like to start by thanking all the members of public that have submitted questions for this evening's executive meeting, and welcome those of you who are able to be in attendance to hear the answer to your question and to ask a supplementary question if you have one. For those public questioners unable to join us this evening, I can confirm that you will receive a written response to your question, and these will be published on the council website within 5 clear working days of the meeting. Please note that in accordance with the new processes, you will not need to say, I ask a question standing in my name. Your question will appear on the screen and will be answered by the relevant portfolio holder. Please note, you will then be given the opportunity to ask a supplementary question, but please remember that this must be to clarify the response provided and not introduce any new business. In accordance with paragraph 5.12.9 of the Constitution, where questioners have more than one question, only their first question will be answered. If after all other first questions have been asked and answered and there is sufficient time, the subsequent questions will be answered. Please note the time limit for public questions is restricted to 30 minutes. And if your questions have not been answered in that time, you will receive a written response within 5 clear working days. The responses given either verbally at the meeting or in writing will be published on the council's website. Before I go over to the first question, I can see Councillor Dillon has his hand up. Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. It was just looking at the amount of public questions. I wondered if you would consider extending it to 45 minutes for this session, but I think you might have just answered that in your closing remarks there.
We have 30 minutes, but actually, Councillor Dillon, a number of people, which I'm about to read out, it was only your hand up, are not here so will receive a written. So I actually think we will get through all of these. I'd be surprised if we didn't, Councillor Dillon. Okay, in which case, Mr. Gareth Beard, Mr. Ian Hall, Mr. Ian Moran and Ms. Alex Pullin will receive written responses to their questions as they have not confirmed their attendance at the meeting by the required deadline. Mr. Graham Story has been advised that his questions I and J will not be answered this evening as the date he has requested is not yet available so soon after the introduction of the new housing register system. He has requested a written answer to his remaining question H. Therefore, I will start by answering Mr. John Goatley's question B on the agenda. So over to myself. No, Mr. Goatley. In fact, the Conservatives have done much to protect an individual's asset. The obvious example I would perhaps highlight to you, Mr. Goatley, and particularly relevant here in West Berkshire, and very much welcomed by this local authority, was this government's strengthening of police powers with regards to protecting one's land from unauthorised encampments. There are other examples. The investment into 20,000 new police across the country is very welcome, particularly when you look at fraud as one of the most common British crimes at the moment. So anything that will help to protect one's assets is very much welcome. So do you have a supplementary?
I do. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Mr. Goatley.
Well, thank you for that answer. It was much as I expected, actually, but my supplementary question is to actually seek your advice, and perhaps you can give me the benefit of your experience as a councillor, and perhaps give me an outline of what action you would take to protect your beautiful garden if it was periodically flooded by dirty urban runoff water, which appears to be caused by the reluctance of planners and developers to observe flood management laws.
I'm not quite sure, but that actually relates to the original question, Mr. Goatley.
It's about protecting what you would do to protect your asset.
And I think I've explained what that would be. And if I had a legal right to protect my asset, I would work within the law to do so.
So,
thank you. I think I've answered that as well as I am able to answer it at this point. Can we therefore move on to item D on the agenda, please? Oh, question D, sorry, which is Mr. Stuart Gawley to Councillor Ross McKinnon.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. And hello, Mr. Gurley. I hope you're well. You mentioned our plans for the LRIE, and it's important to remember why we are regenerating that estate. You know, we want to ensure employment opportunities for local residents. We want to attract inward investment and enable existing businesses to thrive and grow. These were key commitments, of course, in our 2019 Conservative Manifesto for the West Berkshire elections, and we are going to do all we can to ensure that the district is attractive to the business community. Now, on your specific point about SIL funds, you know, the proposals are, of course, far too high a level at the moment to make any assumptions about SIL at this stage. Once future master planning work, further master planning work has been carried out, in conjunction with an environmental impact assessment, and we've got a bit more detail on what development type is going to go on what part of the site and so on, then it might be appropriate to consider SIL forecasts at that point. You mentioned the asset of community value status, and I think it's important for me to point out that there's nothing improper at all in what's being proposed relating to the asset of community value status. I'm sure you're aware of that, but I'm going to make that point forcefully right now. Thanks, Mr. Gourley.
Do you have a supplementary question, Mr. Gourley?
Yes, I do, please, Leader. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Oh, good. Yeah, so obviously with the football ground on the London Road being a community asset, when the council is further along and has the SIL funding from the redevelopment, will the council commit to reinvesting that and ring fencing it for the community of Clay Hill?
Thanks, Mr. Gurley. I was wondering if you were going to bring up Clay Hill there, and I hope your Liberal Democrat campaign is going well, but not too well, obviously, and I mean that in a generous spirit. But I hope you're enjoying the process. I think you might be a wee bit confused about what the asset of community value status entails. It allows the registrant of the asset to make a bid for the purchase of that asset when it's disposed of. The council's under no obligation to accept that bid, but they are entitled to make the bid. At the moment, it's not being disposed of. There may not be a disposal of that asset. It should be pointed out, of course, that we're making an exciting alternative provision for football and other sports elsewhere in Monk's Lane. So I wouldn't want to commit to ring fencing any funds at the moment, but we're already making those provisions right now for the sporting community. But thanks for your question.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Can we therefore move to question E, which is Ms. Alison May to Councillor Steve Arderwater.
Yes, good evening, Ms. May, and thank you for your question. This is an important element of our environment strategy, and we do recognise the part that our carbon sequestration has to play in helping achieve our 2030 target of carbon neutrality. And since publishing our strategy last summer, we've been focused on developing an overall delivery plan and building a team to help move projects forward. We're currently engaging on the draft delivery plan. This is out for consultation now. You can view it on our website. And if you scan through that fairly detailed plan, you will see that a high-level item exploring opportunities and planning for natural carbon sequestration is definitely a key part of that. This also links with the government's environment bill and how we work to ensure biodiversity improvements are delivered in the district in connection with developments. We continue to build the necessary expertise and capacity within our team to cover the wide-ranging work involved in the delivery plan. As you may know, carbon sequestration is a complex and deep issue, and we are engaged with conversations with partners and other organisations to develop a joint approach to this to deliver key pieces of work. We're therefore hoping to make good progress with our plans and make more detailed plans available for sharing over the next 6 months. So in summary, we've got a very high level detail, which is now again open for consultation. We continue to consult, and we will follow up with more detail within 6 months. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, hi Steve. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I do. Yes, I have actually read the strategy, and I noticed the high level reference to CSS. But I'm sure you can appreciate it can actually take quite a while to generate the baseline data in order to start actually measuring CSS performance. So I was hoping actually that that by this stage you'd actually commissioned relevant surveys of our natural landscapes in order to actually have that baseline data there to contribute to the measurements that you should be releasing hopefully within the next 6 months or so.
Yes, thank you, Alison. And again, this is a deep issue, and
my question is, when are you expecting the results from the natural landscape CSS surveys? Have you commissioned them?
We are already working with partners who themselves are doing this. We, West Berkshire, are not commissioning directly. Our intent is that developments will, as the Environment Bill has set forth, that development within this district will be obliged to offset development with a biodiversity net gain. The development, therefore, the measurements for individual projects, I would expect to follow on those. We don't have, and I wouldn't expect to have a district-wide blanket survey of this matter, but absolutely areas which are most promising, I would hope for us to be able to share within the coming few months, 6 months. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you both for your questions and answers. Can we move therefore to N on our agenda this evening, which is Mr. Vaughan Miller, or to Councillor McKinnon?
Thanks, Leader, and hello again, Councillor Miller. I hope you're well. The old football ground in its current state, it can't be reopened to anyone until the unsafe structures that are there are removed and the area generally made suitable from a health and safety point of view. In terms of youth football, it's recommended that the present arrangements are kept in place until the new facility is completed down at Monk's Lane, and then it's entirely appropriate for youth groups to play at the new facility. As a general point about the LRIE project, at the moment we have vacant possession of that old football ground site, and we want to maintain that status in readiness for the regeneration. If the old pitch opens again for general recreational use, which is what the council has decided to do, then that vacant possession isn't affected. If we were to enter into single-use occupancy for a particular sport, then that position may well be jeopardised. So that is not something the council is willing to do. Thanks.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. So just to be clear, the proposal or the motion was to postpone the application for demolition and then engage with the local football and interested parties to explore options to make it available in the meantime until it's required for development. So no one is proposing single-use occupancy or having a tenant as before. I mean, there could be several years before any development starts. There's clearly no requirement to spend money, public money, I should say, on a general recreation field in that area.
Are we getting to a supplementary question, Councillor Vaughan?
Yes, I am.
Not a statement.
To make the public fields, there's public fields available close by, and to say you don't want to limit it to one sport, as you said before, and this has been a football ground for over 50 years. So again, it seems to me like you're making misleading statements.
Councillor Miller, what is your actual supplementary question rather than your prolonged interpretation?
My actual question is, again, why a reasonable question, why you will not talk with appropriate stakeholders, Newbury Town Council and the football community, to make the best use of the space and the taxpayers' money as part of a COVID recovery plan for grassroots youth football.
Thank you, Councillor Miller.
Thanks, Leader. Yeah, I'm afraid the only one of us making misleading statements here tonight was you there, Councillor Miller. The motion doesn't say what you said it was. In fact, the motion calls for the postponement of the demolition until such time as the alternative site is confirmed and approved by the football community. The motion calls on the council to tie its own hands and be beholden to the consent of this very vague group of the football community. That's what the motion says, which is not exactly, or it's not entirely what you said. It said a moment ago. So, no, I'm afraid you're mistaken. And we eventually got to a question which I believe was a repetition of your first one. So I refer you to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Thank you both. Can we move on therefore to question O on our agenda this evening, which is Mr. Gary Norman to Councillor McKinnon.
Thanks, Leader, and thanks, Mr. Norman. I hope you're doing well. Metal sheet hire and 24-hour emergency call-outs in respect of the old clubhouse costs on average about £570 per month. As long as that building remains in situ and there's no income from the asset to support those security costs, that burden will continue to increase. That's obviously for as long as the demolition is postponed, then those security costs will rise. There are also periodic repairs to the existing boundary to prevent unauthorised occupation of the site, which, of course, the site being where it is and the nature of it is always a risk of that. The site's already been broken into. Children have already been caught playing on the roof of the old clubhouse. It's imperative that we get moving on the demolition as soon as possible. In fact, with the lifting of lockdown, the council will probably have to increase the security to include CCTV and periodic dark hours drive-by security. That's going to increase security costs still further to prevent unauthorised access into a potentially dangerous building, a building for which there is no future purpose and no logic at all in retaining. Thanks.
Do you have a supplementary, Mr. Norman?
Yeah, given that it's going to be £570 a month and that the council itself wants to spend in excess of £190,000 to demolish buildings in order to provide an open field surrounded by a car park, in effect starting a future developer's site preparation for them. Can you explain why this is not a misuse of public money?
What's a misuse of public money? I don't think I follow.
You're going to spend £190,000 in order effectively to save a developer's costs in the future and to provide something that isn't required in order to save £570 a month. That doesn't add up to me.
All right, okay. Well, the £570 a month relates solely to current metal sheet hire and emergency call-out. The costs of unauthorised occupation and potential payouts if people are injured in the building, then they would obviously spiral much higher than that. And well, I'll refer you actually to the introduction I gave to Mr. Gooley's question. The reason we are spending the money on LRIE is to safeguard jobs and investment for the future. Alternative provision is being made elsewhere for the sporting and football communities. So, of course, it is not a misuse of public funds. But thanks, Amy.
Thank you both. Can we move on to question P then, which is submitted by Mr. Jack Harkness?
Thanks, Leader. Yeah, I've just answered, I think, a very similar question. So current arrangements are in place to prevent serious injury to anyone breaking into the old clubhouse. You know, from an insurance point of view, the council has to take reasonable measures to prevent that unauthorised access to the building and be prevented from potentially a major claim in the event an individual is seriously injured while breaking into the building, which has already happened. The breaking in, not the injury, thankfully. The surest way of removing the risk of a serious and potentially expensive claim is to remove the risk altogether and demolish the clubhouse and associated structures.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary, Mr. Harkness? Stephen, is Mr. Harkness here, or shall I move on?
He is here, yes.
Sorry, I haven't updated myself. Apologies.
Here he is.
Yeah, the question that I think I was particularly interested in was the expenditure of 190,000, which has been answered in the previous question. But the word serious in the question. Could you just explain further what the serious implications are for the council?
Councillor McKinnon?
Yep.
That's your question, isn't it?
I think it was.
I wanted a little bit further explanation on the word serious. I understand that it costs money to demolish things and so on.
Right, okay, sorry, that's my confusion. Yes, Councillor McKinnon.
Sure, yeah, the security cost, the potential insurance payout if someone's injured in breaking into the building, and the potential cost of removing unauthorised occupants of the site, they mount up and would become serious.
Thank you both. Can we move on to question Q then, which is Mr. Paul Morgan?
Thanks again, Leader, and hello again, Mr. Morgan. No, we don't agree that the council's left itself open to a challenge on rejecting the motion and on the charge of the grounds that you state. The council as a landowner has been very clear very, very clear in its intentions for redeveloping and regenerating the London Road estate. This is to deliver regeneration to the benefit of the wider community. Any planning application in this regard would be subject to the full planning process and would be dealt with under the Council's local planning authority powers and duties. The Council, as a landowner, is entitled to reasonably protect its assets and bring forward proposals for regeneration. Thanks.
Do you have a supplementary, Mr. Morgan?
Yes, I do. Yes, thank you for that response, Councillor McKinnon. Much appreciated. It still concerns me because it does smack to me as predetermination and predisposition. I mean, for example, Councillor McKinnon, you've mentioned a number of times in your early responses that you keep saying that the new facility in Monks Lane will be completed and will go ahead. Whereas we haven't received any details of that planning from anybody. We've got one diagram and it hasn't gone through the planning process. So again, you're predetermining the outcome of something that you really shouldn't be doing.
Councillor McKinnon?
Yeah, I don't accept that interpretation, so I'm afraid we'll have to agree to disagree.
Why don't you accept it?
Okay, thank you both. Can we move on therefore to item C on our agenda, which is Mr. Goatley to Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Leader. And thank you, Mr. Goatley, for your question. The housing service works with a range of providers for accommodation and are not aware of any surplus of two-bedroom flats in the area. This is different to advising customers that two-bed flats may be coming up due to a new build site completing, or where we might be procuring two-bedroom flats in partnership with a landlord that will be ready to let. With regard to planning, all new build properties, whether they are flats or houses of differing sizes, have been subject to meeting planning policy and the needs of the area in terms of achieving a mix of tenures, sizes and types of housing across the district. The local plan also sets out the framework for the future development of sites in the district. Do you have a supplementary, Mr. Goatley?
Yes, please. I do. Yeah, thank you for your answer. Very interesting. I'm just wondering, though, if we're not falling into the same mistakes as have been made in the past. There seems to be a massive amount of development around the Newbury area. A large proportion is flats and there's demand for affordable housing. Are we not just going to create the ghettos of the future with this plans that we've got? Especially, for instance, the flats next to where the council offices are. It just looks like rabbit hutches for people. They're going to be affordable.
Okay, Mr. Goatley, should we let Councillor Cole come back on that? Councillor Cole?
Thank you. I disagree that we're creating ghettos of the future, Mr. Goatley. Certainly the site that you've mentioned with regard near the council offices, that's high quality apartments, and we do have size standards for all apartments, so nothing will ever resemble a rabbit hutch if things are brought forward, applications are brought forward and go through the due planning process.
Thank you both. Can we move on to our final question, L, on our agenda this evening, and that's Mr. Gourley to Councillor McKinnon.
Thanks, Leader, and hello again, Mr. Gourley. No, the council won't withdraw the application to demolish the clubhouse if the rugby club proposal is approved. Regardless of future plans generally, the old football clubhouse and associated structures are wholly beyond economic repair. They are a health and safety risk and an ongoing security maintenance cost. It's imperative that we demolish them as soon as we can. So no, the answer is no.
Do you have a supplementary, Mr. Gourley?
Yes, I do. Thank you. With the plan to use the football ground as a green space in the interim, will the council look to provide alternative facilities for community people that are using the area?
Councillor McKinnon.
Again, forgive me, I'm not sure I understand the question. We are providing alternative sporting facilities at the site in Monks Lane. If I've got the wrong end of the stick, then...
Sorry, no, I mean in terms of like toilet facilities and amenities for use for people that are using the green space.
No, I mean, the plan is to turn it into a recreational green space for the use of the public, much like the nearby parkland is. So no, I'm not aware of any public toilet facilities or the like that's proposed.
Thank you both. Therefore, we have covered all of this evening's questions and we've covered it in time. So thank you all for your participation. We can move on to item 5 on our agenda this evening, which is petitions. And I don't believe that there have been any petitions handed in. Is that still the case, Linda?
Yes, we haven't received any petitions.
Okay, thank you both. Thank you. In which case we can move on to item 6 on our agenda, which is the new domestic abuse and safe accommodation duty. I understand, Councillor Wollaston, you're going to be introducing this report. Councillor Wollaston, you're on mute.
I'm very sorry.
It's the phrase of the year.
I know. The joys of Zoom. The domestic abuse bill is currently before Parliament, and I understand had its second reading in the House of Lords yesterday. It puts a duty on Tier 1 authorities to assess the needs and to provide support for victims of domestic abuse and their children. Subject to achieving royal assent, this duty commences from April 1st of this year. Domestic abuse is something that I'm sure we are all seriously concerned about, and I'm delighted that the Government has found parliamentary time for this key piece of legislation. Here in West Berkshire, it has always been a critical issue and a key performance indicator that I watch closely. Even during this pandemic, we have a very good record, probably as a result of Council working closely with other agencies, including Thames Valley Police. The key recommendation is to set up the West Berkshire Domestic Abuse Board under the chairmanship of Executive Director Andy Sharp. This board will report directly to the Health and Wellbeing Board, which will also agree its terms of reference. This ultimately comes under this executive. I would like to propose to accept the recommendations in this report.
Thank you, Councillor Wollaston, who was so eager to get off mute and talk there that I hadn't had the chance to come in to say I'm very happy to second this report. So I'm happy to second this report. I'd just like to say, with regards to second it, there's 2.4 million victims of domestic abuse a year, aged between 16 and 74. That's 5.5% of adults, and more than 1 in 10 of all offences recorded by the police are domestic abuse related. So I'm very pleased to see the new domestic abuse bill coming through. This is one duty, but there are many duties coming through within there, not least to establish in law the offence of domestic abuse, the Office of Domestic Abuse Commissioner, and set the Commissioner's function and powers, and to actually define some of the definitions around domestic abuse. So I agree with you entirely, Councillor Wollaston, that this is a really important piece of legislation. Here in West Berkshire, I've actually been actively involved in the Domestic Abuse Forum for many years. We work in partnership and there is a good domestic abuse strategy for the area. However, I do welcome this duty on local authorities to provide support to victims of domestic abuse and their children in refuge and other safe accommodation. I know we have existing refuge accommodation and that was updated fairly recently, but I think there is always more that we can do, particularly around the move on accommodation. I was pleased to see that noted in your report. I therefore think that any financial support for the board to progress with this work and move forward, particularly around a gap and needs assessment for additional service, is very welcome. So I have no hesitation in seconding this bill before you this evening. Members of the executive, is there any questions that you have for Councillor Wollaston with regards to this paper? Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Leader. Not a question, really, a commentary to some extent, if you'll allow me. And I'm sorry to have to disagree with Councillor Wollaston, but it was the third reading in the Lords yesterday. And I think that there are some amendments that the Lords have suggested that, so it needs to go back to the Commons. So I comment that this is another area which will fall within my new portfolio, and therefore I take an interest in it. And I certainly welcome the prospective legislation because it is, at the moment, prospective. And I welcome the emphasis upon addressing significant and challenging issue of domestic abuse. Now, the point I make about it being prospective and the fact that the bill hasn't yet passed into statute is that I just want to point out that it is possible there may still be amendments. And the paper that's been drafted is based on the bill as it stands. And there may need to be some amendments to the terms of reference to ensure they line up with the new legislation. So what I'm suggesting is that the terms of reference and everything that surrounds them are considered in due course by this new board, and then by the Health and Wellbeing Board, under which the new board will sit. So that's my comment on the process, but I certainly welcome what we're seeking to do.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman, and we're fortunate that we've got Andy Sharp, Executive Director, who will be leading on this, listening to your comments. So I'm sure he will be taking those on board for the future work of this, and I'm sure you'll be able to work in partnership together on that particular point. Can I go therefore to Councillor Dillon?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Actually, my comments were going to be exactly what Councillor Bridgman said, and it's that you're making proposals based on a bill, not on an act of Parliament, and so as long as it's all subject to that final change, then we'd be happy to support it, I think, from here.
Thank you. I do know that we were given the money up front to get prepared, and I think this is very much part of that preparation, Councillor Dillon, so happy to take those points on. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, Councillor Wollaston, I've just got a few questions, if that's okay. I was wondering to what extent the membership of the existing group and the proposed board is going to be, and how significant the changes in that membership are going to be in terms of our ability to tackle this issue. And also it mentions an overall figure for the project, but I was just wondering if we know how much of that is going to be spent on administration and how much is going to be spent on delivering service. And also the extent to which it might make a difference in the number of refuge places that we've got, whether we have a figure about the increase that there might be in that support that we can offer to people. Thank you.
Councillor Wollaston, are you able to come back on that?
I am indeed. Thank you, Councillor Culver. The membership is meant to consist of representatives of West Berkshire Council, victims of domestic abuse, children of DA victims, DA charities and other voluntary and community sector organisations, healthcare services, policing or criminal justice. As you probably know, A2 Dominion actually run most of our work on this side at the moment in terms of refuge. I can tell you the current numbers are for 2019-20 was 6. We have 4 units with 6 bedrooms available at present. And I say our numbers are relatively small as an authority compared to the rest of the country. In terms of your final question, I'm afraid I don't have the knowledge to be able to answer that.
Thank you.
We'll come back with, can we just take a note? What was the final question? Sorry, Councillor Culver.
One was how much extra refuge places we think we might have. And the other one was what is the split between the administration costs and the amount of money we can spend on the service?
All right, we can provide you a breakdown of that split. So we'll let you have a written answer for that, Councillor Culver. Thank you.
Thanks, Leader.
Councillor Pattendon.
Thank you, Leader. The national, well, since the start of lockdown, and obviously due to the pressures of lockdown, domestic abuse nationally rose 7% for April, May and June of last year, and generally has been rising nationally, but that doesn't seem to be reflected in the local figures reported by Thames Valley Police, which is on page 142 of this the meeting pack in the key accountability performance report. That shows a decrease, particularly in Q3. I wonder, Councillor Wollaston, whether you think that what explanation you might have for or your thoughts on why the picture locally doesn't seem to be reflecting the national picture.
I have to say, Councillor Padden, back on the first quarter, I think it was, I got seriously concerned because it was showing a significant increase on the previous year. But in fact, that was a blip. And in the reality of it is, our statistics have consistently said that there is very little change throughout the pandemic. And so we're doing something right in West Berkshire. I'm not quite sure what it is. Whether it's because we're a sort of more green area, I'm not really sure. But certainly, let's say, compared to the rest of the southeast, we are doing extremely well.
Okay, thank you all. Any other questions? In which case, we have a proposer, we have a seconder. The recommendations are laid out in 2.1 and 2.2. So therefore, please can I ask executive members to vote by raising their actual hand if they're in favour of the proposal to approve the recommendations this evening.
Thank you, Leader. I can confirm that that has been passed.
Thank you, Sarah. Can we move on to item 7 on our agenda this evening, which is the Housing Strategy and Delivery Plan? And I believe that Councillor Cole, you wish to introduce this report?
Yes, Leader, thank you.
And does that find a seconder this evening?
Yes, Leader, I'm very happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Arderwater. Back to you, Councillor Cole.
Thank you. This Housing Strategy and Delivery Plan will replace the previous housing strategy, which was adopted in 2010 and actually expired in 2015. A 6-week consultation took place in September 2020 through to November of that year. This high-level strategic document is linked to other strategies and policies and will run until 2036. This housing strategy sets out the national and local context regarding housing, the vision and key priorities for the district, how and when we will deliver our priorities through the delivery plan. There are two key priorities, and these are firstly to enable every resident to have access to a home that meets their needs, and secondly to reduce homelessness. And just to cover some specific points, the data sources for the infographics are the most up-to-date published data available and come from a variety of sources. The housing strategy makes reference to the impact of COVID, and we will ensure that there is a review mechanism to update any emerging trends or urgent actions as a result of COVID. However, we're still reacting to the pandemic, so we cannot preempt the full impact yet. But we are alive to some significant impacts, including capacity issues relating to the provision of services such as mental health, accommodation solutions for young people and lost sleepers, especially long-term suitability for shared accommodation, changes to the economy that will result in economic hardship and affordability issues, a potential increase in homelessness, increasing aids and adaptations as a result of long COVID medical issues, and further mergers of registered providers to sustain themselves as social housing landlords and also as a business. And of course, we also have plans in place to deal with these, which include reviewing and updating actions as required, continued partnership working, consultation with organisations and stakeholders, and lobbying for additional funding when needed. And I have to say, the housing team's been extremely successful in obtaining funding recently. So I propose that the executive approve the housing strategy and delivery plan as set out in the recommendation on point 2 on page 39 of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Members of the executive, do you have any questions with regards to the strategy and delivery plan for Councillor Cole? Councillor Arderwater, do you want to come in there?
Yes, thank you, Leader. And again, it's not a question, just a couple of comments in addition to Councillor Cole's summary. So again, I'm very delighted to be supporting this this strategy paper. Two things of key concern to myself. Firstly, I'm very glad to see that there is a strong focus on the environmental impact of housing. and a desire to raise the standard of future housing build. And secondly, that unavoidably this district is facing a period of often unwelcome demographic change. We're getting older and household sizes are getting smaller. And so I'm very glad to see that this will provide a good high-level response to that, and that I'm confident we will be able to adapt as time goes forward. So again, I hugely endorse this strategy.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Arderwater. Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman, Leader rather. Well, you're both really. I commented quite extensively on the earlier draft, and I'm pleased to see a few of my comments have been accepted. My main overarching worry, though, and it's still there in a number of the action plans, and it's the action plans that I'm focusing attention on, is lack of resources. You're right to say that you've been very successful in getting external funding, and in fact in the budget there was a certain amount of internal funding, and I'm really pleased that you've been able to do that, but it is still down in the action plan as a risk. So I just want to highlight that, and you can be assured that of course the opposition will be watching that area closely. My other point is about in fact, it refers back to what Councillor Arderwater was saying. Demographic change leads to a lot of under-occupation of larger premises. And of course, we're very agitated about the social housing sector and the private rented sector. And the government has used the heavy stick of the so-called bedroom tax to deal with that. But actually, there are 25 million bedrooms nationwide in owner-occupied properties that are heavily under-occupied. Now, I know there's not a lot that one can do about that, and you can't force people to downsize, but a huge part of the housing problem in this country could be solved by dealing with that. And I see that action number 1.5 is trying to work on private rented landlords to some extent. But could you perhaps, could Councillor Cole perhaps explain, what further possibilities might have been investigated where we could tackle on under occupation, because it is a waste of resources, and I'm as guilty as anybody. We're sitting here in a 4-bedroom house and only 2 of us. I'm sure
you've answered your own question, Councillor Vickers.
We have a good reason, because we have family living abroad, and when they do come home, which unfortunately is the last year they haven't been able to, we can accommodate them all, and that's really lovely. But
I suspect that's probably the answer you'll get from a lot.
There are lots of different personal questions, but are we doing anything to remind people? Because there comes a certain age when actually it is quite a problem. People find it just too stressful, too difficult to move, and they really should be moving. And that has knock-on effects with adult social care and so on. So it's a question about the joined up thinking. It affects environment, it affects adult social care, it affects housing, it affects planning. The under-occupation problem is serious, and this country is not good at dealing with it compared with others. So it's just a thought. And my other thought is that in Action 1.16, maybe because I'm been off the council for a while, I hadn't realised that quite an important part of the housing function is now looked after by public protection. And I'd like to know, maybe not here, maybe outside of this meeting, what liaison there is between the public protection side and the housing service in those areas where there is a crossover. I see action number 1.16 is talking about public protections, private sector housing policy. And I see where the differences are, but I want to know how these areas link in terms of governance and oversight.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Vickers. Councillor Cole, are you able to, other than downsizing, Councillor Vickers, are you able to take on some of those? The downsizing is an interesting and a difficult issue, and I'm not sure we'll solve it here in West Berkshire, but have you got some thoughts around that, and then around the work with the PPP teams and housing, please?
Well, to be honest, I think dealing with downsizing and persuading people to downsize and move from homes where they've brought up their families or they love and they get on well with their neighbours, they like their neighbourhood. It's a difficult one. We're not a sort of draconian state whereby we can force people to move. We can only encourage, and that is all I can say, Councillor Vickers. I mean, you've stated your own example.
But the government uses this.
Yes, you might want to make space for your family when they come and visit, but that is perhaps no reason for you keeping a 4-bedroom house. They could stay in a hotel, for example. I just leave that one with you, Councillor Vickers. But the one thing I would point out is that we can't do anything about houses that are occupied, but houses that are empty across the district, we have a very good scheme whereby we've tried to bring empty houses back into occupation, and that is by charging 3 times the amount of council tax on empty properties, and that has had a positive result. So I think that's quite important to remember. And with regard to public protection has always been responsible for inspecting homes of multiple occupation. So there is that legislation that has been their statutory duty for a long time. So there's been no change there. And I can assure you that the housing team and the public protection team, both of which are within my portfolio, work very closely together.
Thank you both. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, a few questions, Councillor Cole. Thank you for presenting this paper this evening. I think one thing that we could do to try and tackle the issue of under occupancy in the larger houses is to provide more smaller homes for people to move into. And being a member of Western Area Planning Committee, I'm conscious that we've had a number of large applications where we haven't met our own target for 1- and 2-bed private homes, for example. And I think unless we build those sort of houses, it's going to be very difficult for people to downsize. Councillor Arder-Walter made the valid point that if we're going to tackle this issue from the point of view of demographics, we need to have these houses that people can move into, and also younger people who can't afford a large house need the option of those smaller homes. Quite concerned to see the increase in the number of applicants on the housing register between March 19 and March 20, a rise of over 79%. And also the fact that we're still not building enough affordable homes. I just wonder if Councillor Cole could comment on whether she thinks that we ought to be grasping the nettle now and actually building more social homes. These would be investments for the council, basically. They'd be assets for the long term. They would quickly pay themselves off in terms of rental income, and then we would be able to make money on them in the future. And it would provide much needed accommodation for people. And finally, my understanding is that there's a report that's being undertaken, which isn't due to complete until March 22, about demand for affordable housing from young people. And I was just wondering why this report has been finalised now, and should we not have waited for the results of that survey first? Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Cole.
Thank you. Councillor Culver, I agree that there is a need for smaller homes. However, we do encourage, we work with developers and we do try to encourage them to build out smaller homes, but actually it's market forces, and if developers identify a need for larger homes, then that is what they will be delivering. With regard to applicants on the housing register, we've got a new, we've just revamped the housing register, as you will remember from a report that was brought forward recently with regard to changes of the housing register. So I think the figures that you are quoting are will be adjusted with regard to that. Affordable homes, yes, we are currently looking at a feasibility for developing our own housing company, which would give us the ability to deliver affordable homes. But you must remember that we did, I think it was in 1988, pass our housing stock over to what is now Sovereign Housing Association. So we divested ourselves of our housing stock. So we would have to build up that again. And with regard to demand for housing for young people, that work is being undertaken, but we are working on that. And yes, I take your point about looking about working towards March 22. But we do need to assess what we can do for your people at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cole.
Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. It was actually a question around private landlords, because I think it's about the only bit of the paper I can talk on without getting into trouble at work. So, Councillor Cole, in the paper, it talks about the council having enforcement rights to bring private rented accommodation up to a better standard. But have you considered either a good landlord's register, or even, the rogue landlords register, so that members of the public, so we actually could name and shame those small proportion of landlords who might be abusing their residents, in effect, through renting out their property in such a poor state. Now, I appreciate that, particularly here in West Berkshire, where we've got higher land cost and property costs, that actually we might end up with higher proportions of private renters than maybe some of our other local authorities. I'd be keen for views on that as well. Thanks.
Councillor Dillon. We do have a private landlords forum, which had sort of fallen a bit in abeyance, but we have our house manager Janet Weeks has just reinstated that recently, and also we are planning and we have got the funding to do a survey on housing condition in the rented sector, so that will also pick up the housing that is substandard.
If from that survey we found that there maybe was a potentially bigger issue, would you be open to considering, doing that type of landlord register rather than a forum?
I think that is a good point, and I'll take it up with the housing.
Thank you. And then, Leader, if Councillor Vickers wants to swap his house with me, I'll put his family up when they come round.
I'll let you two debate that one. Councillor Abbs.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I'm just wondering, Councillor Cole, whether or not you've looked at the retirement sector in much detail. I've had similar experience here, and it's one of the last areas, I think, it's the only area of housing I know that when you buy one, it goes down in value rather than up, and it's pretty much consistent. And we see a whole section of society getting ripped off, and I personally see it as a big blocker, because there's plenty of retirement properties being built for the over 50s, over 55s and so on. However, when you're looking at something like 100k loss, when you unfortunately lose your elderly parent and you try and move that property on, it creates a huge disincentive for people to downsize and move into those properties. And I'm just wondering, is the government, can we do anything ourselves? Because there are some huge charges and some, I won't call them landlords, but they are all kind of groups of people, groups of companies that basically service all of these things, that are basically ripping the public off.
Councillor Cole?
To be honest, Councillor Abbs, I don't disagree with anything that you're saying there, but I don't know what powers we have as a local authority to action that. It is an interest. The retirement housing sector is an interesting sector, and I think it is very difficult for people, because there are some swinging charges, and it's really and people are really tied down by these people. But I don't think there's much we as a local authority can do.
Well, right. But if I may, Councillor, what I'd love us to do, therefore, is to lobby our MPs.
You've taken the words out of my mouth, Councillor.
I agree.
Okay, thank you both. It sounds like an action there for you then, Councillor Cole. Councillor Brooks.
I just would like to say that there are a lot of landlords who found a reason to buy to let in order to preserve their savings at a time of very low interest rates. And therefore, I like the idea of a register, but of course, a lot of landlords go through a letting agency, and perhaps the letting agencies also need to be, regulated. But my experience of renting my mother and father's house out has been very good, and with a lot of standards to have to maintain, and we've been pleased to do so. So the only question I've got for Hilary Cole really is, have you downsized now? Are you living in a loft?
You
don't have to answer that.
I don't
Hilary.
have to do that. I'm not living in a loft, and I'm ashamed or guiltily admit that I did actually upsize in 2011 to give me some space.
I suppose there's not much difference between a gym and a loft, Councillor Brooks.
No, I can see your exercise back in the
right. The gym that doesn't get much use, yes.
And the recommendation would be to everyone to update your new Zoom blurred backgrounds if you don't wish people to see into your living accommodation. Anyway, let's move on, because I think we've had a good discussion there. I think it's a really important report that we've got. We've got a clear recommendation to approve the Housing Strategy 2020 to 2036 and the delivery plan as set out in Appendix A. Please can I ask executive members to vote by raising their actual hand in favour of the proposal to approve the recommendations.
Thank you, Leader. I can confirm that that recommendation has been carried.
Thank you, everybody. Can we move on then to item 8 on our agenda this evening, which is a response to council motion on the scrutiny of the community infrastructure levy payments. Councillor Cole, I believe you're going to introduce this report, but does this report find a seconder?
It does, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. Councillor Cole, over to you.
Thank you, Leader. Much has been made of the 2 cases mentioned in the motion, particularly in the local press. However, in both cases, the local government ombudsman found in our favour. Councillor Brooks mentions that incorrect submissions were corrected rapidly when pointed out by the applicant. This is correct. However, what should be borne in mind is that planning permissions last for 3 years. And what Councillor Brooks neglects to mention is that in one case, it was over a year before the applicant approached us, and in the other, the development was completed and the apartments were being lived in before a check was accomplished. Although checks are carried out on an annual basis by the SIL team in conjunction with planning and housing colleagues with regard to SIL liability, it's impossible for officers to check each individual planning application which has a SIL liability, because construction can begin at any time within the 3-year period. In the instances mentioned in the report, both of the applicants had appointed agents who submitted the SIL forms on their behalf. The error clearly lies with the applicant's agents, who were, along with the applicants, given several opportunities to get things corrected. And I would suggest that these agents should be the ones from whom the applicants should seek redress. And I understand that this may have happened in one of these cases. All of the paperwork sent out to applicants clearly states that it is the responsibility of the applicant to submit the correct information in the correct manner. And our website also has comprehensive and clear guidance regarding SIL submissions. Councillor Brooks is quoted in the press as saying, the adopted processes would appear to be gotcha, going on to say this smacks of sharp practice. My inference from these statements is that he's implying that officers have been overzealous with the enforcement of the rules and the collection of the monies owed. And I find his comments distasteful, imprudent, and above all, untrue. The SIL legislation is prescriptive, and the government is aware of this. However, there were no changes in the regulations until 2019, which is some years after the planning applications for both of these cases were approved. Councillor Brooks is asking for an independent scrutineer to review the method of handling SIL payments from developers. The SIL process has been audited internally twice. The internal audit team operates independently of other council services and acts without fear or favour, to which some services who have been on the receiving end of their hard-hitting internal audit reports can attest. I therefore don't agree that we should appoint an independent scrutineer, as our internal audit team has done an extremely thorough job and the regulations have been followed. We would therefore be incurring an unnecessary cost in order for independent scrutineers to reach the same conclusions as our own team. And I would point out that the local government ombudsman has also acted as a scrutineer. And for these reasons, Councillor Brooks's motion cannot be supported, and I propose a recommendation to reject the motion as set out in 2.1 on page 93 of the agenda be approved by the executive. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Members of the executive, do you have any questions or points of clarification from Councillor Cole? Councillor Stewart.
Chair, Leader, before you go, I should say that I reserve my right, if I may.
You may. Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I think in part you've already answered this, Councillor Cole, but can you think of any benefit that there would be of having yet another sort of independent scrutineer, in particular when, as you said, the complaints mentioned in the motion and in the report were actually not upheld by the local government ombudsman, who are an independent scrutineer? I'm struggling to think of why we would need to do this and what that benefit might be. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Stewart. I don't think there will be any further benefit to us to have more independent scrutiny. These cases have been scrutinised to the nth degree, and I feel that to have any other independent scrutiny would be a cost to the authority, which we do not need to make.
Councillor Cole, before I go across the room, can I just ask, because I too was surprised by the language of gotcha from Councillor Brooks, if I'm honest, and reading the report and the two examples that are given, that doesn't appear to me to be the case. There seem to be numerous attempts at getting information, so I don't understand the gotcha moment, but could you just tell us what the actual process is for the normal process, just to make sure this gotcha piece, is it one strike and you're out?
No, not really. Once the planning application has been approved, a civil liability notice is issued, and at that stage the applicant can query or challenge that civil liability, but people are not allowed to start development until the CIL papers are completed. And if an exemption is agreed, the applicant can't commence work before notifying us that the work is being commenced. And therefore, in these cases, that notification wasn't carried out. But the CIL team are incredibly helpful with people. There is a lot of information on the website, and I feel that Councillor Brooks's remarks, as I said, were unfortunate and unworthy of Councillor Brooks, for whom I have a great deal of respect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cole. I'll go across to Councillor Brooks.
Well, I've got a great deal of respect for Councillor Cole, but we can disagree now and again. And I'm hearing of more of these cases, so this isn't going away. I'm going to be tabling those and writing to you about those, Councillor Cole. My question is simple. If both of these applicants had filled in all their paperwork correctly, would those properties have been 0 rated according to CIL? Simple question.
The simple answer is yes. And the simple answer is
0 rated, as you're saying. Let me be clear.
The simple answer is yes, they wouldn't have been charged still, but they didn't fill in the paperwork correctly. Therefore, they an advisor's in the correct order. So that is why they were
Councillor Cole, with the greatest respect, you're not talking about a couple of £100 here. You're talking tens and tens upon tens upon tens of thousands of pounds, and you're telling me they should have been zero rated, but because they didn't fill in the forms correctly, you said, gotcha, now pay. And I'm saying it again in public because that's what it sounds like. And thank you for being so explicit. The public now know that some forms being incorrectly filled out led to £65,000 in one case and £25,000 another because forms were not filled out. Can you hear yourself?
Councillor Brooks, we can all certainly hear you. You are shouting, and I don't think this is an appropriate place to be shouting. Councillor Cole is answering your questions, and I would ask you to respectfully speak to Councillor Cole rather than shouting at Councillor Cole.
I've raised my voice. You haven't heard me.
Councillor Cole, do you want to come back?
Well, I think Councillor Brooks is highlighting these two cases, but there are other people who have who have filled in the forms correctly and have not had to pay the community infrastructure levy. We have to be fair. I have said that the SIL legislation is extremely prescriptive.
Okay, thank you.
We have no room for manoeuvre, Leader. And it's all right, Councillor Brooks shaking his head and making all sorts of public pronouncements, but we have to abide by the legislation.
You have been told.
Thank you both.
You have been told.
Councillor Brooks, you have made your point and you've shouted at Councillor Cole. I'm going across to Councillor Culver, who's been sat with her hand up.
Councillor Cole feels I shouted, I apologise. I raised my voice because I am so aghast that this council has taken money because of forms not being filled out correctly, and it's not a small amount of money. And therefore, I think my anger reflects how the public will feel about this as well.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks.
Can I just point out, Leader, that one of these cases was subject to an appeal, so it wasn't the initial determination.
Okay, thank you both. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Cole, thank you for this paper this evening. In addition to the issue of people not completing their paperwork correctly, I'm also aware of cases where people have been charged because loft space has been added to the new build, even though the loft space is not to be habitable. And also an incident where the calculation did not take into account that some of the existing building was knocked down when some new builds was put up. So it wasn't a net calculation, and that led to people being charged when arguably they shouldn't have been. So I just wondered if you've got a comment on that. And also in 5.6, it makes reference to 4 cases, and then it details 2 of the cases. And I just wondered what the conclusion of the Ombudsman was with regard to the other 2 cases that aren't mentioned there in detail. And also 5.12 talks about a number of weaknesses. 11 weaknesses were identified. I wonder if you could expand upon that, please.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Culver. Councillor Cole?
Thank you. I'm not aware of the cases that you've mentioned, Councillor Culver, so I can't make any comment, but I'll inquire and we'll get back to you. With regard to the other cases, I will also get back to you because I don't think that I want to be discussing in a public forum any other cases that are not referred to in the motion. So that is what I would suggest. I get back to you separately on all of your questions, Councillor Coleman.
So you're not able to comment on the weaknesses then in 5.2, sorry, 5.12.
I haven't got the audit report in front of me. The weaknesses were picked up and were addressed.
We'll come back to you with the audit report on those, Councillor Culver.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody. I believe if everybody's had the opportunity to talk, I'm going back to Councillor Bridgman, who reserved his rights for the final word before I put this to the vote.
Thank you, Leader. Members, the motion refers to two applications and the applicants maintaining in those applications that they had been penalised. Now, in my professional life, many people have maintained that they are correct and that the actions of someone else has materially affected them. And again, in my professional life, that's what the courts are there for. But here the applicant has two extra limbs of challenge before they get anywhere near the courts. First, a planning appeal, and second, an appeal to the local government and social care ombudsman. And after that, they can still go to the courts. The motion seeks external expertise to undertake an independent review. I absolutely agree that and this is with the Councillor Cole, that our internal audit process is independent and acts internally to criticise a service where criticism is needed. And in response to Councillor Culver, I would say that it is not by any means unusual for internal audit to identify some issues with a service. Indeed, one might worry if they found every service to be completely squeaky clean. However, I would point out that in the report, the weaknesses are identified as moderate and 5 of them as minor. Now, having dealt with some, I haven't got that specific audit report in front of me, and I therefore can't comment on what those moderate and minor weaknesses were, but they were, I say, moderate and minor, and no doubt we can answer that in writing in due course. But more to the point here is that over and above internal audit, both the planning inspectorate and the local government and social care ombudsman are external expert reviewers sought by Councillor Brooks. And in these cases, we have the local government and social care ombudsman finding in favour of the council. Councillor Cole also makes an important point, in my view, about agents. If I employ an agent to act on my behalf in making a planning application, and they fail to make that application properly, resulting in a legitimate charge that I might have avoided, I would look to the agent, not the charging authority. And if we were losing CIL appeals right, left and centre, or the ombudsman was regularly finding in favour of CIL complainants, or we were losing court cases on another regular basis over CIL, I'd certainly think that there might be something to call in an external investigator on, but that simply isn't what is happening. And on the question as to CIL's general attitude and what Councillor Brooks described as the gotcha moment, I've also had some local experience where an applicant in my ward made a mistake in an application, received a demand for CIL, and that CIL was in the amount of tens of thousands of pounds, brought it to me, I took it to the CIL team. There followed a meeting between the CIL team and the applicant. Paperwork was produced, the charge was withdrawn. So the CIL team do listen. They're not somehow blindly charging applicants for the sake of it. Indeed, my resident described the officer concerned as, and I quote, incredibly helpful and understanding. I think the report makes clear what our response should be. Both of these matters have been investigated at length. They have gone to external scrutiny in the form of the Ombudsman, and I support the conclusion to reject the motion and support the note in the report. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. So we have a recommendation in front of us, which is to reject the motion contained in 1.1 above. Can I ask members of the executive to vote by raising their hand in favour of the proposal to approve the recommendation? Can I see a show of hands from all members of the executive if they approve the rejection?
Thank you, Leader. I can confirm that that recommendation has been carried.
Thank you, Sarah. Can we therefore move to item 9 on our agenda, which is the response to the council motion relating to the demolition of the former Newbury Football Club ground clubhouse? Councillor McKinnon, I believe you're going to present this report.
Thank you very much, Leader. Yes, I'd like to propose that the executive rejects this motion.
Okay, thank you. And does this find a seconder?
It does, Leader. Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Sumner. I'll therefore go back to you, Councillor McKinnon, to present your report.
Thank you very much, Leader. Yes, this motion should be rejected. While our opposition parties continually seem to want to make a negative story out of the redevelopment of the London Road Industrial Estate, it is important that we remember why we are doing so. We want to ensure employment opportunities for local residents. We want to attract inward investment, and we want to enable existing businesses to thrive and grow. As I've already commented this evening, in 2019, we stood in a manifesto to prioritise a strong local economy. Specifically, we committed that Conservatives will ensure the district is attractive to the business community. We'll encourage new commercial opportunities across the district to ensure high employment and a strong local economy. Our investment in infrastructure will help businesses to thrive and help their planning for economic and physical expansion. Following the impact of COVID, it's even more important now that we, to coin a phrase, build back better. Now is not the time for delay when we need to actively stimulate our economy. And the regeneration of this part of Newbury will be a key element of making sure that West Berkshire is open and welcoming to business. The motion itself is very strangely worded. The notion that the council should tie its own hands in making the site usable for the enjoyment of the public as a pleasant recreational space by agreeing to be beholden to the consent of such a vague entity as the football community is not credible in the slightest. I can't imagine there would be a local authority anywhere in the land which would so restrict its own ability to provide a good public amenity. There must be thousands of people who play football in Newbury. I really hope that those bringing the motion aren't implying that the self-styled Newbury Community Football Group is the same thing as the wider football community. I'm sure you wouldn't possibly be suggesting that. In any event, football or any other activity cannot take place on that site until the removal of these unsafe structures, as has been discussed earlier in the evening. In any event, the motion has somewhat been overtaken by events, namely the exciting provision of an improved facility elsewhere in the town, which I hope the opposition parties will support wholeheartedly. I think it would raise eyebrows if they didn't. I'm sure they can't believe that only this area of Faraday Road is the only possible site in Newbury for a football pitch. In summary, we have made alternative provision as defined by the playing pitch strategy for the former football club facilities provided on the estate, and that alternative provision is within the Newbury area. All appropriate engagement has been undertaken with the signatories to the playing pitch strategy to ensure the objectives can be met. There is absolutely no logic in retaining dilapidated and potentially dangerous structures. The council remains committed to the regeneration and redevelopment of the estate, and it is not prepared to take any action that might jeopardise those plans, including renewed single sport reoccupation and management of the former football ground. We have proposals in place that will allow the old grass pitch to be used for general public enjoyment until the area is required for redevelopment. And those proposals maintain the council's control of the asset, ensuring freedom of action as and when the land is needed for redevelopment. As I've already made these points to public questioners earlier on. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor McKinnon. Members of the executive, is there any questions you have for Councillor McKinnon? And I'm looking at Councillor Sumner. Do you wish to reserve your rights, Councillor Sumner? Or come back now?
I'll reserve my right, Leader.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Sumner. Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. And I'm not going to use my speaking time to rehash the whole of the London Road debate. But what the motion was doing, Councillor McKinnon, was asking for football to be reopened until another site was identified. And at the time of the motion, there wasn't another site identified. Your administration had numerous years to find alternative sites and hadn't done, and had also evicted a football club without securing any additional sites. In your paper, you talk about the rugby club proposal, and that if that isn't suitable, that there is another viable alternative on the table. I think that we would all challenge you in terms of the baseball diamond being a viable alternative for a football club. Not least the impact of that Pigeons Farm estate and the loss of their public open space to accommodate a closed football ground. So what I find most amazing of all, Councillor McKinnon, is you talk about the football site as if it was none of your fault, as if the Conservatives aren't the ones who are accountable for it being a health and safety danger, for children not being able to play football and adults playing football in the centre of the town for what, 2.5 or even probably longer than that now, 2018, yeah, 3 years. So what we were doing was we were trying to put the ducks in the right order. You were just moving ahead without caring about the sporting and recreational side. And we're driving forward with the preconditions that existed under the St. Modwin agreement and don't exist in terms of having to be able to hand over unrestricted access to that land. And also what the motion didn't do, Councillor McGinn, was in any way tie your hands to being able to release that site at the appropriate juncture, because you would have been securing a tenancy or a group using that site with the timescales known in advance. So you absolutely would still be able to hand over untied access of that land to a developer if needed. There were lots of public questions about this. And I know that the leader of the council doesn't like questions on just London Road. But actually, I think the one from Nigel Foote, where he really highlighted the fact that you're investing 190 grand to create a car park and a piece of grass, when the people in Newbury already have a piece of grass the other side of the A339 called Victoria Park. Whereas we think that actually by spending a bit more money now, you could have at least provided something. And this should have been done years ago, Councillor McKinnon. And the administration has never said sorry to the people of Thatcham for cocking up the St. Modwin development in the first place, and then having to not address that untenanted land for so many years. And it's your fault that it's fallen into disrepair, nobody else's. Thank you.
Thank you for your thoughts, Councillor Dillon. Councillor McKinnon, do you want to come back on some of those?
Yes, please, Leader. Look, I mean, I get that you can disagree with a decision. I mean, fair enough. But there are good reasons for the decision that we've made here, very good ones. Now, those taking your opposition position might consider that you've got good reasons for that too, and that's fine. But it won't be lost on colleagues and observers that here we are tonight, yet again, discussing the former pitch at Faraday Road, and with, I'm sorry, Councillor Dillon, yet again, the requisite history lesson. We had St. Modwin and it was your fault. You know, how many times are you going to go back into history here? Despite the fact that the next moves forward in the project were decided by executive decision in December. That decision was then subject to what, in my opinion, was a nakedly political call-in to OSMC, which of course found that the executive had acted properly. And yet here we are again. At some point, you would expect that you would say, look, we disagree, but shake hands, accept the decision, dust yourself down and move on. And the residents of Newbury and West Berkshire must be scratching their heads as to why you are not capable of moving on. It is very strange to be constantly shouting, this was your fault, you did this wrong back then, Faraday Road, when we're providing what I'm sure will be a superb facility elsewhere in the town. But that's up to you.
Yeah. Just a point of information, I tabled this motion in December. The only reason we're talking about it in March is because that's when you bothered to come back to us.
Okay, thank you both. Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm also somewhat fed up with it going on about this, but really I'd like us to bring this to planning. It's planning that will decide what happens, whether it's the demolition here, whether it's the recreation here on Faraday Road as well, or whether you're going to have this wonderful facility at the Rugby Club. Good luck with your timetable on that. But let's, for goodness sake, get on with the planning, particularly the 2 Faraday Road applications. And then I will be questioning whether or not members of the executive who are on a planning committee have predetermined, but clearly quite determined, whatever happens, to go ahead with their plan, irrespective of planning. That's what it seems to me. I will look at the evidence when it comes to the planning committee.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers.
Tied by a decision made at this meeting to go ahead with something without planning consent.
Councillor McKinnon.
Well, I don't say these words very often, but I agree with Councillor Vickers. Let's get on with it. Let's get moving. There's been far too much delay on this project. So yeah, I completely agree. Don't agree with the predisposition points, but I'm sure that'll be for the planning committee to decide at that point. But thank you.
Thank you. I see no other hands, and therefore I'm going to Councillor Sumner to have the final word on this.
Thank you, Leader. There isn't much I can add to the views expressed by Councillor McKinnon this evening, including the responses to the questions earlier. For me, we see in this report that the structure, whether it's in use now or not, is unsafe. And noting the comments by Councillor Dillon, it is what it is and it's unsafe. And that's got to be the major factor in coming to the decision to reject the motion tonight and to move forward to demolition. Overall, for me, this project needs to see traction, and I'm sure many members of the public want that. Who knows, as again, it was mentioned earlier, this might even be an opportunity to provide smaller properties within the area. And we all recognise that is a need. That's not predetermined, that's just a general statement. For me, we should move towards delivery of the administration goals and to move past the delays that we've experienced in the past and up till now. And I hope that we can address those delays with some positive action. I don't regard this proposal of the motion to be in line with that, and I'm happy to support the recommendation, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Sumner. In which case we have a recommendation that the executive resolves to reject the motion. Can I please ask executive members to raise their actual hand if they're in favour of the proposal to approve the recommendations?
Thank you, Leader. I can confirm that that recommendation has been approved.
Thank you, everybody.
I thought your deputy leader was going to abstain then, Leader.
Broadband issues, Councillor Dillon, broadband issues.
Can we therefore move to item 10 on our agenda this evening, which is the Capital Financial Performance Report? And I believe it's down to Councillor McKinnon to introduce this report.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I'd like to propose that members simply note the capital forecast financial position at Q3.
And does that find a seconder? Councillor Bowick, you're on silent. I'm assuming
I'd like to second Councillor McKinnon's proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Bowick. Back to you, Councillor McKinnon.
Thanks very much, Leader. Yes, so the capital forecast position for the year end is at the moment an underspend of the capital programme of just over £5 million. That represents an improvement on the forecast underspend position at the end of Q2, which was £12 million. So in a sense, we're sort of bouncing back towards the capital programme's goals. That improved position is aided somewhat by an agreed reprofiling of projects at the end of Q2 into the next financial year. When we looked at these projects, the Q2 capital financial performance back in December, there was a list of reprofile projects with just over £7 million. Again, for any residents watching who are unaware of what that term means, it doesn't mean the projects aren't going ahead. It just means that delays to the projects, and I've said this before, and Councillor Brooks is usually pretty reasonable with this one. The COVID pandemic, of course, has pushed some of these projects into next year, and you would expect that to an extent. So that's really part of the reason why we've got an improved underspend position, but it is an encouraging movement. The projects that were reprofiled, 4 million of them were environmental projects, 2.5 million were education. The recommendation is to note the report. I'm happy to take questions.
Apologies. Members of the executive, do you have any questions for Councillor McKinnon? Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Leader. Not so much a question, really, I suppose, as a statement. Certainly from my own portfolio from Transport and Countryside, I think the last year has been testing at best. But I'm grateful to the work that's gone on from my officers with our contractors to achieve what they have achieved. I think some of the projects that have been worked on and completed have been absolutely superb for the residents of West Berkshire. There's been some excellent work gone on, and where we've managed to move timelines to accommodate the continuation of that work, I think that should be absolutely applauded, Leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sumner. Councillor Bowick, are you wishing to come in here before I go across the room, or?
I'll reserve my right. Thank you, Leader.
Thanks, Councillor Bowick. Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Leader. And Councillor McKinnon, thank you for pointing out. I've looked to take note of the difficult circumstances we've been in, but let me prod you again, if I may. I have been banging on and will continue to bang on about the movement in forecasts, and here we are in 3 months, a £7 million movement in the underspend. Now, you know as well as I do, Councillor McKinnon, getting forecasts as accurate as possible is important, and not having big movements in them is also important. So I really will keep saying this until our budget holders start to feel that there is pressure on them to forecast more accurately, because decisions are made on forecasts. And if they are palpably out in the way they have been this year and previous years, then bad decisions could be made. And I feel Councillor McKinnon, if he's fair to what I'm saying, will agree with me, because he works in business as I do, and forecasts matter. And, you know, where are we going to be at the end of this month? Because we're looking at Q3 now, end of December. Are we going to be down by another 5 million and it's all been spent, which for the people of West Berkshire is probably a good result. And he might tell me that. But for forecasting and taking decisions based on it, it isn't.
Councillor McKinnon, would you like to come back on that?
Yes, I will. Just a wee bit there. Thanks, Leader, and thanks, Councillor Brooks. Always look forward to the prodding that you give me in these sessions. Often it's quite a challenging one, and that's fine. Now, look, ordinarily I'd agree with you, and I'm not saying I completely disagree with you here, but remember, this capital programme was set in March 2020. I think it would be very odd indeed if you didn't see large fluctuations in the capital programme being spent out throughout the financial year. Now, what you say about budget holders need to be accountable and forecasting needs to be good, I completely agree with that. But if there is a clear logic for the variance, which there is here, then it means that I'm less concerned about it. It doesn't mean I'm not concerned at all. It doesn't mean I want forecasting to continually improve. But I think it would be odd not to see these reprofilings. And as you can see, the reasons for it are logical and they're sensible. What you say, though, is not without some merit. Thanks, Leader.
Thank you both. I've got Councillor Pattenden next.
Thank you, Leader. So I notice in section 5.5, we have a 1.4 million underspend in the education department due to delayed projects, Speedham Land and the Eastern PRU, for example. Now, presumably these are being carried forward into the current year. But if so, bearing in mind that they will then also be joining the, I think it's 28 million or so other this year's capital projects, what's going to be done to make sure that last year's proceed and get completed, as well as those ones in this year's capital programme? But bearing in mind that we heard not so long ago that there can be some questions about the project management capability, for example, for some of these projects.
Well, those questions weren't raised by me; they were raised by your Lib Dem colleagues, I think, Councillor Pattenden. I mean,
they're very true.
Well, we're all hopeful that, you know, once we eventually emerge at the light at the end of this horrible pandemic tunnel, then things will bounce back very quickly. I saw an article in the press today. I think it was Andy Haldane. He's the chief economist of the Bank of England. He's expecting the fastest recovery ever. You know, activity really bouncing back. We've got all this pent up demand there. Will there be potential project management issues? I'm sure there will be. But those in charge of our capital programme, I've got every faith in their ability to manage that.
Thank you both. Councillor Abbs.
Thank you very much, Leader. Councillor McKinnon, I'm just curious, apologies for not having the detail myself to have, but could you explain to me what the 4 million worth of environmental projects, I think you mentioned 4 million of environmental of the 7 million that shifted, what was actually not done, considering we've been in a climate emergency for, well, before March last year? Why is the environment taking such a big hit on the number?
Well, we weren't able to carry out the projects because...
Which projects is what I'm asking?
I'm not going to read them all out to you, but because there's a lot of them. They all add, there are a lot of small projects which cumulatively add up to 4 million. What I can do is refer you to the executive agenda pack from the 17th of December last year. And if you look at page 279 of that pack, you'll see the list that you're wanting. It would take me quite a long time to read them all out. But December executive agenda.
Do you not agree with me? It's somewhat disappointing that it's such a big.
With my project, I hadn't quite finished, and
sorry,
we're not in the chamber here where heckles and interruptions are a lot more tolerable. It's worth pointing out in Zoom that if I'm speaking and you interrupt me, no one can hear a word I'm saying, and it becomes a disjointed rabble. So I don't think it's disappointing. I've referred you exactly to the page where you'll find the detail you're asking. Rather than spend several minutes reading those out, I'm referring to you right there, Councillor Abs. I can't do fairer than that.
Thank you both.
Thank you very much, Councillor McKinnon.
Okay, I have no other hands up, and therefore can I go over to you, Councillor Bowick?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I think the capital programme is one of the most exciting aspects of what we do in council. Spending the money means that we're improving the lot of our residents, and in my particular area of responsibility, yes, I'm disappointed that in Q3 we're behind, but as Councillor McKinnon said, there's good reason for that, largely, not wholly, but largely down to COVID and the delays that that's brought about. But just as we managed to, we successfully have delivered 2 new schools in West Berkshire in the run up to this period, I'm absolutely certain that we have the project management capacity and there is the capacity in the industry to make sure the money gets spent through the end of this year and into next year. And I'm very happy indeed to second the proposal that we accept this programme, this update.
Well, the recommendation is purely to note, so there is no vote required, but thank you for that, Councillor Bowick. Can we move on therefore to item 11, which is again, it's a to note report. I believe this is you, Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you, Leader. It's quite a lengthy report. We're used to this format of report. What I wanted to do just to introduce it was to highlight some aspects. I've said in my own portfolio, and of course with your announcement, that's in my current portfolio until the end of the meeting, and then it will be very different next time round. So some aspects are similar to previous quarter. For example, collection of business and domestic rates is below target, as we would expect, considering the payment breaks that were taken up and the holidays. And although as at the 20th of January, collection rates for council tax were at 89.13%, and for business rates, it was actually at 80.71%. So there has been some catching up in Q3. In my own portfolio, as I said, some positive news is that over 70 placements have been created for young people as part of the Kickstart initiative, which has been really good to see, and 13 of those are actually within the council. On the other side, one of the exception reports shows the challenges we've had of finding and placing disadvantaged young people or those with additional needs into apprenticeships whilst in lockdown. Very difficult thing to do because it just wouldn't be right if we couldn't support those young people fully. We have agreed to part fund 8 job coaches in schools to support disadvantaged pupils, which we hope may lead to apprenticeships in the future. We have found a fixed term contract role for a previous apprentice from a disadvantaged background, and also part funded a complaints apprenticeship role, which we hope to be able to offer to a disadvantaged young person in the future. We're also keeping an eye on our staff sickness levels and well-being too, as you would imagine. So although these levels are lower than at this time last year, that's no reason to assume it will stay the same, even as we head out of lockdown and emerge into the spring and summer months, which hopefully should bring some relief with warmer weather and lighter evenings. But we're giving our staff the opportunity to take part in a free Berkshire-wide challenge in April, which was actually talked about at a meeting this morning with the health and wellbeing partners for Get Berkshire Active, and that's using the Buddy Boost app, and you may have seen some publicity about it recently. Buddy Boost is an app-based challenge where the aim is to complete 26 minutes of physical activity every day for 26 days in a row. And it also gives our team members an opportunity to buddy up and to encourage each other and to support each other. So I've actually been talking recently about mental health challenges, and in particular the fear that some people will have in that emergence back out into whatever normal looks like. And actually we're hoping that this sort of activity will help to improve those sorts of situations and how our own teams and staff are feeling. I'll leave it there, Leader, and whether any of the other portfolio holders would like to speak to their own portfolios.
Members of the executive, is there anything you would like to add? I'm happy to second this report, but I'll come back, I think, probably at the end. So, Councillor Bridgman.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Two things from the portfolio I have for another, I don't know how long we're going to go, another hour or so. We've discussed the CQC ratings of our own care homes numerous times. And in the most recent conversations, I've made 2 points. Firstly, that Walnut Close was closing. Indeed, it has now closed. It has not yet come off the list because we're looking back into the past in this report, but it will come off the list. And the other one is that CQC had suspended inspections. Now, on that latter point, we do have a question coming up later about Alice by Court. And if you look at the CQC report on Alice by Court and compare it to the very good CQC report we had on Willow's Edge, the Willow's Edge report was very much a COVID report about the COVID response, about the way in which the care home had dealt with COVID, whereas the Alice by Court report is very much a standard traditional CQC report. So it looks like the CQC are getting their act back together, and I hope that they will inspect Birchwood in the not too distant future, because I hope that I am handing over to Joe Stewart as my successor a positive piece on Birchwood. We won't know until it's been inspected. Of course we won't, but I'm hoping that that will move from its current red status to a green status. We shall see. The other point I just want to pick up is that for the eagle-eyed amongst the opposition, the eagle-eyed amongst us, no doubt, there is what looks like a discrepancy in the reference to adult safeguarding between the paragraph at 4.3 and the paragraph at 5.8. In 4.3, it refers to a reduction in safeguarding inquiries in adult social care. And at 5.8, it refers to an increase during Q3 after being, quote, lower than normal due to COVID-19 in the previous 2 quarters. Now, I took that up with officers. And in fact, if you really look at the numbers, Q3, yes, it's more than Q2 or Q1, but it's lower than Q3 last time round. So actually, there is a trend of perhaps a short-term trend, I don't know, lowering safeguarding adult inquiries. And the other point I would make about safeguarding adult inquiries, as was made this morning at Health and Wellbeing Board by me and agreed to by the chairman of the West of Berkshire Safeguarding Adults Board, is that an inquiry is precisely that. It's an inquiry. It isn't necessarily a safeguarding issue. And I encourage people to come forward with safeguarding inquiries so they can be investigated. What I don't want to see is vast numbers of actual issues arising, because that would indicate we have problems. But safeguarding inquiries, absolutely, we should be looking into safeguarding all the time. So I welcome the safeguarding inquiries, but the numbers, the text is just slightly misleading on the actual numbers. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman, and for that clarification as well. Members of the executive, any other points that you'd like to raise on any of your own portfolios? In which case I will ask Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. In the summary, I mean, it's saying there's, I think, about 22% of your targets are red, and the non-domestic rates, bit council tax, and the CQC Birchwood home, I completely understand the reasons for that. But I think that I'd be interested in your views on carrying that type of percentage of reds. Even if you take off those other 3, you're still probably about 15%. And then I wonder, when you do speak as well, Leader, if you could just talk about maybe future plans for how this report gets considered in the council structure. Because again, I'm sat here on the 25th of March, and there's a comment, for example, on the apprenticeships that said it was going to strategy board in February. But so why am I reading a paper formulating questions when a decision's already happened? You know, I mean, we do have a problem with this loop, and I think it was probably demonstrated particularly well by Councillor Stewart in the fact she was talking about schemes that you're going to be launching in April. Well, this paper is about Q3 stuff that happened before Christmas, and and I think we're all trying to look forward. And if we are looking back, we need to be close enough to have done something about it. I mean, again, any recommendations we were to make out of these have probably already been considered by officers. I mean, I see that, for example, picking up a little bit what Councillor Abbs was saying about the climate taking the hit on the capital budget. We see a target here about the deforestation and tree planting. We then see an explanation that we have recruited in Q3 and we've recruited in Q4, but it's still not a priority for them. Now, given we voted unanimously on a climate emergency, I know we have COVID as an emergency, but we do have the climate as an emergency as well. And that prioritisation of why can't we get one of the officers to at least start doing some of the work on it? And again, that might have happened, but the report's so old that I don't want to keep going through them really, because I suspect most of it's been superseded. And I think that what we've worked on, Leader, with the chairman of OSMC going forward will hopefully make that a bit better in the future.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dillon. Councillor McKinnon.
Yeah, thanks, that Leader. Just a point of clarification there following Councillor Dillon's comments. When I mentioned in the capital programme that environment projects, it's the environment service. It doesn't necessarily follow that the climate emergency is getting hit with that one. So there's transport and countryside projects in there as well, which would probably be the bulk of it. But just for information.
Thank you, Councillor McKinnon. Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, going on to the exception reports on page 152, the exception regarding the Care Quality Commission ratings of our services. It mentions that Birchwood Nursing Home was inspected in 2019 and achieved an overall rating and requires improvement. Now, I understand that the Care Quality Commission is about to restart inspections of services that require improvement in April. So I'd like an assurance, if possible, please, that we think that the Birchwood will improve its rating when it's re-inspected.
Councillor Bridgman, do you want to come back on that?
Well, I hoped I'd actually said that in my comments on the report. I cannot predict what the CQC will do. What I do know, and what I have said before a number of times to you and your predecessor and to Councillor Dillon, is that a lot of work has gone into Birchwood. A lot of money has been spent on Birchwood. I believe that substantial improvements have been made at Birchwood, but I am not a CQC inspector. So I wait for their report with perhaps bated breath to see what they say about what we have done. We brought in outside agents, we brought in assistants, we have done a huge amount on the use for dementia. There's a huge amount being done in relation to signage and colours, and not just at Birchwood, but in the other care homes, because we used the same report that we received on Birchwood to develop processes for both of the other care homes. And so I hope that CQC comes back with, at the very least, a good rating, but I don't know. I'm not going to hold myself to a prediction on that. We shall see.
Okay, thank you. Could I just move on to the rating, the exception report on number of financial assessments actioned, which is amber, and the remedial management action. It says the new reviewing officer recruited started role on the 11th of January. So improvement expected. There we are 3 months hence. So I hope that we have seen an improvement, and can we expect this to go green by the end of the year, please?
My answer to that one is so do I, and yes, I hope.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up. I take it that's an old hand now, Councillor Macro. Yes. So I'm just going to round up here, really. I did want to come back on this because actually when I sit and read the report, and I'll come to your points in a minute, Councillor Dillon, when I sit and read the report, I'm actually pretty impressed with the performance. I appreciate this is a report to note. It looks back on how we've been doing as opposed to making recommendations of what we need to do. But actually this has been, and we started this executive meeting talking about it, and we talked about that reflection, and I've sort of spent a lot of time probably this week because of that reflecting, and it's been a tremendously difficult year, and I think we're only producing a report like this where, as you say, there's probably about 15% reds, Councillor Dillon. I will come back to my views on that. You know, I think that that actually is testimony to the strength of this council and the fact that it's a solidly good council that has all of these areas being worked on prior to COVID coming in, that we're able to, at this point through a pandemic, present a report to like this to you all to note. And I think while I have the opportunity and while I'm reflecting is we have 3 executive directors with us today, and I would like to just make sure that there are thanks to pass back to everybody with regards to their efforts within West Berkshire Council to do this, because I hear people like Councillor Abbs talk about an emergency, etc., and why hasn't this been done? Yet I have on a daily basis been working with those officers and know that in different areas we have had to redeploy individual members of staff to respond to COVID. So people have not always been doing their business as usual functions. They have had to do what has been necessary for West Berkshire Council to put in place some of the response measures required for COVID. So that's why I'm proud of these measures, is because when I look at the business as usual measures within this report, the core services. Now, if you look at core services, which you might regard as our business as usual, to maintain such a strong performance at Q3, that length of time into a pandemic, and not only to maintain them, to actually produce some exceptional results, such as how promptly people have been able to claim benefit at a time they really need prompt responses, such as the timely assessment of children at risk, where we actually look at new benchmarking data, I'll get it right eventually, that shows us in the top quartile, is a really impressive place to be. But not only have we been able to continue to produce our core businesses, but we've actually been working on areas that were up for areas of improvement within our council strategy. So I sort of think I feel really pleased about this report, and I think all credit is due to the council officers at West Berkshire. With regards to, yes, there will be red ones in there, Councillor Dillon, and when I think I haven't got a percentage in my head of what would be potentially acceptable. What I have to look at is each and individual why it's red and what is red, because if there were red in certain areas, then I might have more flags rising. So I think to say a blanket number or percentage would be quite difficult, if I'm perfectly honest, because I think you have to look at what the actual measure is. I appreciate the frustration within timings. I mean, this is a contextual report that gives you a picture of where we've come from. I think we will always, whenever you're looking at something, you will always be in a reporting cycle whereby if you said to me, did I prioritise making sure that reports were done over actually the response and the action and the work, I would probably say I would go with the response and the action and the work to the getting the reports out there. So I appreciate that this is coming to you after the event, and that work will have already, and I'm pleased that work has already started to go on. But I certainly think that this gives me a lot of hope about what the recovery for West Berkshire will look like. And I know the report notes that it looks like we haven't been as impacted as badly as some places, but I think it's also important to recognise that we're in the middle of looking at a council refresh. So when we come forward to May AGM, I will be talking to you about the council refresh that will have to take into account some of the learnings and some of the things that we have found throughout this last year and how that might impact on our council delivery. But what I am pleased about is, from everything that I see within this report, the timetable for the council strategy looks to me as if it's very much still on course and achievable within the next 4 years. So I'm more than happy to note this report. I do appreciate there's already work being done around some of the measures within there, but I think this is a really solid performance that shows a good council that has not only responded to its core measures, but has continued to improve while we have been responding to the pandemic. And I know people out there might argue with me about what those priorities should be, but we were very clear throughout this that saving lives was the priority for West Berkshire Council and the work that we've done over this year. And I think that's exactly what the focus has been on. So I'm quite happy for everybody to note this report. We don't have to vote on it, but thank you to all of those officers that have collectively produced such a good, solid performance at this stage in the pandemic. I think that's the last business item on our agenda this evening, and therefore I'm going to move to item 12, which is members' questions. So I would like to thank all of those members that have submitted questions in this evening's executive meeting. Please note that in accordance with the new processes, you don't need to say I asked the question standing in my name. Your question will appear on the screen and will be answered by the relevant portfolio holder. You'll then have the opportunity to ask a supplementary question. And can I ask people to remember that is with regards to the initial question. Can I also put through a plea now? And I will tell everybody now, I am not looking for a statement at this point. I'm not looking for your interpretation or your views. It's a supplementary question. We have 1 hour and a lot of questions to get through. And if you start to make your own statements around each of these, then I will close you down because I'm conscious of the number of questions that we have before us and the need to get through them. So in accordance with paragraph 5.12.9 of the Constitution, where the questioner has more than one question, only their first question will be answered. If after all first questions have been asked and answered, and there's sufficient time, we will answer subsequent questions. Please note that the time limit for member questions is restricted to 60 minutes. And if your question has not been answered in that time, you will receive a written response within 5 clear working days. The response given verbally at the meeting or in writing will be published on the council's website. Can we please note that question C submitted by Councillor David Marsh will not be answered at this evening's meeting as it seeks disclosure of exempt and or confidential information. Can I therefore invite Councillor Ross McKinnon to answer Councillor David Marsh question A on the agenda?
Thank you, Leader, and hello, Councillor Marsh. I hope you're doing well. Thanks for your question. Okay, so firstly, I would point out that for the vast majority of the working day, as you know, the town centre is traffic free. The council does share a common goal with the bid to ensure that Newbury Town Centre thrives. In fact, we've provided lots of means of support for businesses during this pandemic. We've distributed over £40 million in business grants. We've unilaterally offered a business rates holiday. We supplemented the government's grants for wet-led pubs before Christmas, with our own match funding. We've accelerated applications for tables and chairs licences and much more besides. You bet we want our town services to thrive. But, and to be fair to this administration, we've tried to explain this to you on more than one occasion. I'll have another go now. There are practical issues involved in removing all vehicular access from the town centre until midnight, as requested by the bid. Access to the town centre must be maintained for residential properties, emergency services and deliveries. Preventing evening access for deliveries and collections would be devastating for the very businesses that we're trying to protect and grow. The current town centre master plan work will deliver proposals on the future operational timings of the pedestrianised zone. This will have to be based, though, on a comprehensive consultation and information gathering process. And it's felt that this is the most appropriate way to deliver change in the town centre, rather than ad hoc temporary measures that may confuse visitors and do more harm than good to businesses. Thanks.
Do you have a supplementary question, Councillor Marsh?
Yes, I'd like to know what you would say in view of that to the owners of businesses I've been speaking to in Bartholomew Street, which is temporarily closed and has been for weeks without apparently causing any confusion, and who in one case told me he'd lost £1 million in turnover in the past 12 months and had desperately been hoping that he would be able to serve customers outside for April the 12th. This is now impossible because of this frankly inexplicable decision. What do you say to all those businesses? 80% of them in the bid support the bid's request. How can you ignore them? Why won't you help them? That's my question.
It's not, with respect, Councillor Marsh, frankly inexplicable, is it? Because I've just had a go at explaining it to you. You might disagree with the reasons, but it is not inexplicable. In fact, the explanation's just been given. I understand that you did refer to a survey at the Town Council annual meeting last night. I understand the people who responded, the number of businesses who responded to that was 30. And that one of the businesses who were in favour of the pedestrianisation were actually one of the most vocal ones against it. So I'm not entirely sure about the scientific or comprehensive nature of the survey that you cite. Thanks.
Thank you both. Can we move on therefore to question J, which is from Councillor Abbs to Councillor Steve Odderwater.
Yes, thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Abbs, for your question. I'm not at all sure what the source of your information is, because this council has no current plans to cancel bus services in West Berkshire. Throughout the pandemic, we've supported the bus network at full capacity, and this council has agreed a 3-year extension to this contract with Reading Buses, and services will be maintained until August 2024. There may be times when certain journeys are scaled back in order that resources can be used more effectively elsewhere, but this is only done where existing services are not being used by more than 1 or 2 people at a time, and where a taxi would have a lower carbon footprint than an almost empty bus. We've got 2 actions in the draft delivery plan, CN 020 and 021, which are to work with public transport operators to support the recovery of passenger numbers following COVID, and then to increase the use of public transport. And at a national level, the National Bus Strategy for England, launched this month, supports these actions with a central aim to get more people travelling by bus by making buses a practical and attractive alternative to the car. And so we will be working with bus operators to develop an enhanced partnership over the next 12 months. Though, of course, the details of what this will mean for West Berkshire are still to be determined. The council will also publish a local bus service improvement plan by October, which will be updated annually. Do you have a supplementary question, Councillor Abbs?
Yeah, just first, the source is the Newbury Weekly News, which on March the 8th had the story school bus service between Blackberry and Bradfield to be down school. Sorry, I won't read it out, but basically said you're scrapping the service. So, you know, you want to know the source. In reality, I agree. I mean, you know, bus services are key. So what's my supplementary? Well, you're absolutely, no bus services will be cancelled under the Conservative watch. Did I understand you correctly?
No, I didn't say that. I said there will be exceptions when there is a virtually empty bus of 1 or 2 people, where environmentally and economically it would make more sense to lay on a taxi instead.
I'm going to come in here. I'm going to come in here.
Actually, question.
I'm going to come in here because I think you're confusing 2 issues, Councillor Abbs, and I think Councillor Bowick may be able to clarify that. So, Councillor Abbs, because you've referred to your source, would you like Councillor Bowick to talk to you about that particular one that you've raised?
No, you can send me an email or something. That's fine.
Okay, thank you. Can we move on then? Can we move on to item L, which is Councillor Macro to Councillor Bridgman?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Macro, and I'm going to apologise in advance for the possible length of this response, because I think it's very important that we get the role of the council in relation to a service which has a CQC report accurate, because there are sort of 2 or 3 different levels to the relationship. And I start by saying that where there are issues with an external provider and their provision, such as in this case, Housing 21 as the service provider and Alice by Court as the service provided, the fundamental responsibility for improving the service and thus raising up a CQC rating is with the service provider itself. Indeed, adult social care, and this is one of my points, will have a statutory responsibility for challenge and to have regard to residents being safeguarded. I think we should also recognise that in the CQC report you refer to, Housing 21 achieved 3 good ratings for the categories of effective, caring and responsive. So turning to your specific question, my reading of the March 2021 CQC report is that it centres on the procedures and practices surrounding the administration of medicines to residents. And to quote from the summary report, people were at risk of harm because staff had not always administered medicines safely and people had not consistently received their medicines as prescribed. The provider had implemented a new policy and procedures to ensure medicines were managed safely and had appointed a medicine champion. However, staff were not consistently following the new procedures. The provider has improved their reporting of medicine errors, which were now open and transparent. However, a high level of medicine errors continued to be made. Now, so far as engagement generally is concerned, the way in which the council engages with a provider regarding the quality of the service they're providing is via the contracts and commissioning care quality team. Although, of course, there are roles for adult social care and, for example, its care management and safeguarding teams. The care quality team has been actively engaged with Housing 21 and the management at Alice by Court since issues first arose, as highlighted in the previous CQC report in March 2020. It is disappointing a year later that Housing 21 haven't managed to address the issue sufficiently to move the grades for self and well-led up from requires improvement. And as a result, a place with caution restriction was imposed upon all placements by adult social care at Alice by Court. But by September last year, there was enough apparent improvement that the restriction was lifted, and that was with effect from November. Then, however, concerns started to resurface around safe medication practice, and adult social care began to be notified, and I make this clear, this is very important, and as recognised in the CQC report, those references were made by Housing 21 itself, and they regarded a number of medication errors that appeared to be affecting clients. And this is positive that the provider was transparent and active in self-reporting, which is something care quality encourage and fully welcome. Care quality joined in with Alice by Court staff meetings to support those staff to manage the rise in medication errors, and indeed shared a copy of our own medication policy. And that resulted in Alice by Court updating their own policy, but because of the problems, place with caution restriction was reimposed. Now, of course, what you will appreciate, we all appreciate, is that the pandemic has got in the way of face-to-face meetings. So care quality have held a number of Zoom meetings in order to establish an improvement plan with the Alice by management. Housing 21 forwarded their action plan on the 18th of December and updated it on the 29th of Jan. Care quality had a follow-up meeting in early Feb, but disappointingly, there were still errors occurring. Now, as I've said, there's also been involvement from adult social care's care management and safeguarding staff. And because there were still issues with medication practice, there was an embargo upon all new placements into Alice by in mid-Feb. Care quality have held follow-up meetings on 26th of Feb and 19th of March. And what is positive is that, as referred to in the CQC report I quoted from, a medication champion has been appointed, and that is a positive step. Care quality has remained in contact with the CQC inspector throughout this and will be supporting Alice by management to address the issues. But let me go back to what I said at the outset. Adult social care has a statutory responsibility to have regard to the safeguarding of residents, and that's paramount, hence the initial place with caution and then the embargo. It's a difficult tightrope to balance for officers between the need for support on one side and challenging the service on the other. While some improvements are being seen, adult social care and our contracts and commissioning colleagues are taking a cautious approach to ensure that the changes become embedded in Alice By's practice and procedures. Now my video's gone off, but I'm happy to take a supplementary.
Thank you. I welcome the fact that we put that place with caution and then an embargo, because these medicine errors seem to be somewhat alarming, particularly with one resident saying she had to be hospitalised as a result. But could I just refer you to I think it's actually the last paragraph in the CQC report, where it says the registered manager did not feel well supported by local authority quality assurance who had engaged with the service in relation to the high level of medicine errors. What I'd like to ask is that an error on do you think, on the part of the Alice By Court, or is it a problem with our care quality people, or is it just a breakdown in relationships?
Well, as I've tried to lay out, there has been a huge amount of interaction between our teams, in particular care quality, and the management at Alice By Court. It's disappointing if a manager or managers in that provider feel what they say what they've said to the inspector. All I can say is that the assurance I receive from adult social care and through them from commissioning is that a huge amount of support has been offered and taken up, as you can see. So I'm not going to comment on what someone else says about the support they've received from adult social care, but I think what I've said to you in the answer to your question shows that a huge amount of effort's been put in.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Can we move on then to item M on our questions this evening, which is Councillor Andy Moore to Councillor Ross McKinnon.
Thanks, Leader, and good evening, Councillor Moore. I hope you're doing well. Look, we know that this past year has been a really difficult one for our local businesses, particularly those in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors. We've put a significant amount of assistance, both financial and practical, in place to help them to reopen safely and successfully. I mentioned several initiatives and grant distributions, etc., in my response to Councillor Marshall a little earlier, so I won't repeat them again now. In our written response to the request from the Newbury bid and Newbury Town Council that you mentioned in your question, we included details of these plans, which are part of the comprehensive package of support we have made available up to this point. A copy of this correspondence will be provided to you and will be reproduced in the minutes. Furthermore, Councillor Sumner and I had a very good and productive meeting with the CEO of the bid last week, where we explained the reasoning behind our not being able to agree to all of the requests. Some of the reasoning were those that I put to Councillor Marsh earlier on. But all parties agreed to work together collaboratively in the future.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Moore?
Yes, thank you, Councillor McKinnon, for your answer. My supplementary is, what has changed between now, when you've rejected a well thought through request on traffic-free timings, which has the support of the town centre businesses, and last summer, when this administration introduced a 24/7 traffic-free zone with little consultation?
Well, I can only refer you to the answer I gave earlier on to Councillor Marsh, and others have given that answer before, that to reduce to increase the pedestrianised hours without consultation, without a temporary ad hoc measure, would be to the detriment of those businesses that need those vehicular accesses for deliveries and their emergency services who need access to the town. So I understand why you might disagree, but the reasoning for refusing the request for 24-hour pedestrianisation or pedestrian to midnight, those reasons are valid and they're solid. And I can only give them again, Councillor Moore, but thanks for your question.
So why were they different?
Thank you, Councillor Moore. I think Councillor McKinnon's just answered that supplementary for you. Can we move on to item N then, which is Councillor Pattenden to Councillor Bowick?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Pattenden. The government's change of free school meal census date from January to October means that around 282 children will not qualify who otherwise would.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Bowick? Sorry, Councillor Pattenden.
I do, thank you, Leader. So what extra support are you going to give to these 280 children who are going to lose their pupil premium funding as a result of the government moving the goalposts and changing the census date? Because with food bank usage rising in West Berkshire and demands on organisations like the West Berks Baby Bank increasing as well, just because the government has changed this date, it doesn't mean that the financial circumstances of those families is going to change. So that pupil premium is very significant to them, and losing it is going to be critical.
Councillor Pattenden, I think you misunderstand the purpose, the nature of pupil premium. Pupil premium is not a payment that goes to the children's families. It's a payment that goes to the school to allow schools to provide additional support in educating those children and all that's aimed at closing the achievement gap. And now, as far as the schools are concerned, the government have already made significant funding of around £1 billion for catch-up support, which is targeted at the most disadvantaged. And in addition, this group are set to benefit from the holiday activity and food programme with a DFE investment into West Berkshire of around £343,000 across Easter, summer and Christmas. And this will benefit children directly. The disadvantaged, the free school meal children will be receiving food vouchers over the Easter holidays, which will soon be upon us.
Thank you both. Can we move to question P on our agenda then, which is Councillor Dillon to Councillor Bridgman?
And thank you, Councillor Dillon. Let me start by setting out a number of I will seek to answer your question as best I can, but let me start by setting out a number of difficulties in answering it, phased in the way it is. First, let's acknowledge that in the context of a care home, medical care is really nursing care. Care homes aren't hospitals. And if a patient needs full-time medical care, hospital is the place for them, not a care home. I'm sure you know, care homes are categorised as one of two types, those offering nursing care, and that might be in whole or in part, and those that only offer residential care. So let's say that an individual, or possibly more likely the family of that individual, who is discharged from hospital and needs nursing care, approaches a residential and not a nursing care home and is told no, because the care home can't accommodate the individual's nursing needs. Now, is that a refusal because appropriate medical care can't be provided? Technically, you could argue.
Could I clarify my question, Councillor Bridgman, because it would help you? It's just for those who have got acute nursing needs when they come out. So, for example, I've got someone who I know who's got a tracheotomy, and there is no nursing care for them in West Berkshire, so they're now living in Reading. That's where my question's getting at. Right. Is that, and it's not to catch anyone out, it's a genuine question. I mean, I think we're hearing quite a bit about pulling our questions apart. You have them for 2 weeks. You could phone us up and we can clarify. We're just trying to put them down in probably layman's language so the public can understand them as well. But I do appreciate, Graham, and I know that you're very good at being particular with your answers under ASC, and I've appreciated the time you've held the portfolio. It's not to try and catch you out.
Thank you, Lee, and I take that on board. So let me seek to answer that element of the question. Yes, there will be occasions, and a point I would make is that someone discharged on a Monday might not find a bed place in their particular nursing need within district or even immediately outside the district, and then on a Tuesday a bed might have appeared had they come out on the Tuesday instead. So there's a huge fluctuation and fluidity in bed placement. And the reason why someone with a particular medical need might not be able to be placed, and I was going to give you, you've given me tracheotomy, I was going to give you the example of a feeding tube or a syringe driver. We might not be able to find a nursing bed in West Berkshire for those precise issues for that particular individual on that particular day. But what I will say, that there certainly will be cases, and this is in particular, as you rightly say, for a discharged patient with what's been described in my answer as complex medical needs, but they can be also very specific medical needs. There may not be a care home in West Berkshire that on that day has the ability to accommodate requirements. However, what I did ask officers to confirm to me, and they did, is that adult social care has never had a situation, to their knowledge, where it was impossible to find a way to meet that individual's needs. I hope that answers an aspect of the question.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Dillon?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I will do, Lynn, if it's okay with you, is take it offline and speak to Graham and Joe when they come in. I think just my supplementary is, sorry, just on that last comment you made there, Graham, the very last sentence you said. Sorry, can you just repeat that sentence for me? That's not my question, by the way, Lynn.
That is.
I'll just clarify. I specifically asked the question whether there was anyone we had not been able to place.
Yeah.
And I was told no. I was not in, and this was service director level response, not in the knowledge of those officers had we been unable to place someone.
Okay, so my supplementary then is, does placing include placing out of authority?
Oh, absolutely, and I've said that. I think I've been explicit that there will be occasions. There's all sorts of reasons why you place out of authority. I was going to give you the example of someone placed in Swindon who's placed in Swindon because his or her family is in Swindon. So there are all sorts of reasons, but two things will drive that. One is certainly potentially medical need, and the other is cost. I make no apologies for protecting our budgets and protecting council taxpayers' council tax by placing out of district if that is substantially cheaper than placing in district. Although what I would say is that we have deliberately placed in district during COVID to support the care home providers within West Berkshire. We made an absolute policy of placing within West Berkshire. However, on the medical point, yes, there will be occasions when you place out of district and you have to.
Okay, thank you both. Can we move on then to item Q on our agenda, which is Councillor Vickers to Councillor Bowick. Councillor Bowick, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Vickers. From September of last year, schools were given a duty to teach and deliver the new statutory subjects, which are relationships education for primary schools and relationships and sex education, as RSE, for secondary schools. These subjects and the wider PSHE curriculum are key in educating children and young people and developing their understanding of healthy relationships, boundaries and consent. It is important that the subjects are delivered in a safe, age-appropriate way, not through fear, shame or shock tactics. The focus is on what children and young people can do to keep healthy and safe. West Berkshire schools have access to an RSEH subject support officer through the Health and Wellbeing in Schools programme, who leads subject network meetings, subject development, including school policy, resources and content advice, and teacher development and training. The subject support officer is currently reviewing resources, teaching materials and guidance published by organisations such as the PSHE Association and Safe Streets Now, and has issued a sexual harassment and personal safety resources guide to all schools.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Vickers?
Well, thank you for that. That was interesting to hear what's happening in the schools. And I think I heard you say that this is being updated. Can I ask how regular this teaching is? Is it just like is it a one-off session, or is it ongoing and it's quite regular? And I think I heard you say it involved primary schools as well, which was going to be in my supplementary. So, so how frequently are these sessions held?
They are regular sessions. It's part of the PSE curriculum and it's scheduled into the children's programme across the term.
Okay, thank you both.
Thank you.
Can we move on to question S then on our agenda, which is Councillor Barnett to Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you for your question, Councillor Barnett. I would like to start by saying that our data isn't actually organised by ward, but rather by parish. Since the introduction of the Community Infrastructure Levy in 2015, the amount of income derived from Section 106 payments has declined. There has been £8.8 million in Section 106 payments within Greenham Parish area since the 1st of April 2015. 8.3 million of this arises from the development at Newbury Racecourse. Since 2016, there have been no developments in Greenham Parish that have had a Section 106 contribution attached. With regard to the Community Infrastructure Levy, the developments since the 1st of April 2015, which are still liable, have generated £470,321.72 in SIL receipts within Greenham Parish, of which 15% or £70,335.41 has been passed directly to the Parish Council for spending on local infrastructure projects. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Barnett?
Apologies, Councillor Cole. I thought I was unmuted. Sorry about that. Thank you for that answer. You've actually partially answered that. You obviously identified the percentage of the SIL money which relates to the Greenham Parish. Obviously, it's a difficult situation because Greenham Ward, of course, covers part of Newbury wards, which used to be the old Victoria Ward. So you've obviously referred to Greenham Parish in particular. The only thing I would say is, have you got any breakdown at all for the Section 106? You obviously give the total amount, but has that gone into Greenham Parish or Greenham Ward beneficiary projects, or is this been diverged across the district?
Well, don't forget with Section 106, Councillor Barnett, not all the Section 106. Section 106 it was a different method of distributing monies, and the only monies from Section 106 contributions that went to town and parish councils was that for public open space. Whereas still, it's 15% of all the SIL in that particular parish that goes to the parish council.
Okay. Thank you both.
I can't tell you how much public open space Section 106 was given to Greenham Parish or Ward, but if you want that information, I'm sure it can be made available to you.
Thank you. I'll pursue that outside the meeting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you both. Can we move to question U on our agenda then, which is Councillor Vickers to Councillor Bowick.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Vickers. The Home to School Transport statutory guidance dictates that as the crow flies is used to determine the nearest school. And then further to address the entitlement, the walking route distance is calculated using mapping software to determine if the application meets the distance criterion. And we do this using, as I say, mapping software. You could try this yourself, Councillor. You can use the interactive map on our council's own website to do this.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Vickers?
I do. It does seem ridiculous. I mean, you might have a large body of water as the crow flies and have, miles to walk around Lake Windermere or somewhere, don't we? We don't have lakes. Isn't there some move by the LGA in particular to bring this whole system up to date and change the legislation? Because this is totally unfair. It depends on the particular terrain, the particular geography that somebody happens to live in. And you're not going to tell me, with these large sums of money that are now involved in school travel, that this can't, isn't open to huge unfairness. So isn't it time, would you agree that it's time that this should be changed, and shouldn't the LGA, and we should ask the LGA to lobby for this?
You're misrepresenting the situation, Councillor Vickers. The crow flies measurement is used to define the catchment areas to define the nearest school. And if then the walking distance it needs to be measured. So if there's a large body of water and the child has to walk around that route, it's almost certainly going to be beyond the threshold, and they would be entitled to free home to school transport on that basis.
Okay, thank you both. Can we move on then, please? Can we go back to question B on our agenda, which is Councillor Marsh to Councillor Wollaston?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Marsh. I've been on site as a direct result of the ongoing negotiations. I've been to the Rugby Club on numerous occasions some years ago, taking my stepsons to mini rugby. I'm also aware that colleagues in the executive have visited the site in the last 2 years, so I'm familiar with the layout and our proposals. This is in addition to various council meetings we've held at the club over previous years. Do you have a supplementary?
No.
Thank you. Can we move on to item K on our agenda then, which is Councillor, well, I'm not quite sure who it is, if I'm honest.
It's Councillor Abbs, leader.
Right, okay, thank you. Can Councillor Abbs, the question from Councillor Abbs to Councillor Steve Arderwater.
Yes, thank you again, Leader, and thank you again, Councillor Abbs. So working with schools is a key part in our community engagement programme. We're exploring how we can most effectively engage and taking advice from our school improvement advisors. There will be more information communicated with schools in the summer term, when schools will be able to turn their attention to such things as travel, following their very busy and disruptive start to education in this latter stages of the pandemic. We've been diligently collecting data on modes of travel for journeys to and from school for quite some time. So once we're in a position to engage more fully with schools, we'll have the necessary data to assist them to encourage more active travel and to reduce car journeys. Again, we are influencing school travel choices already. You'll be well aware of the investments we're making in walking and cycling routes, in cycle training, and quite recently we have been announced, and we will shortly be starting a public health partnered trial with a school streets initiative in Calcott. So a lot is going on. We are very, very focused on the schools and the contribution to which they can and hopefully will make towards reducing the overall carbon footprint in this district. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yeah, I agree with most of what you said there, Councillor Arderwater. You know, the hearts and minds of children at school is a great place to start, and we do need to very much focus on that. I think I'm looking for really whether you believe people should be taken out of cars and into buses, or put onto bikes, or where's your emphasis in the delivery plan, in the consideration? Where's your thinking going?
Well, I know from certain engagement with my local school, Francis Bailey School in Thatcham, that there are a wide number of options open to children and parents. And obviously those have different carbon impacts, and some parents need a bit more encouragement to leave cars than others. Many other parents are enthusiastic already in terms of walking and cycling. Whether a journey is more appropriate by bicycle or bus, I think really comes down to the individual and the geography of the school and its catchment area. So in general, we need to obviously enable a large number of opportunities and alternatives, and offer parents the most attractive way to reduce the carbon impact of their travel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Okay, can we move on to question O, which is Councillor Pattenden to Councillor Bowick.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Pattenden. Catchment areas are used in admission policies to help prioritise applications for schools when more applications are received than there are places available. Admission authorities, we're an admission authority, but some schools, especially academy schools are their own admission authorities. They do not have to use catchment areas, but they are widely used as a high priority. Children do not have to attend their catchment school. Numbers are constantly monitored, and catchment areas are reviewed as and when necessary in line with demography and large housing developments. Should a logical change be proposed, a full consultation will take place. Catchment changes are detailed on our website, and the most recent is an increase in the size of the Downs catchment.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Pattenden? Councillor Pattenden, I think you must be on mute.
My turn this time. Yeah, so as an example of how the system you describe doesn't work very well, what would you say to children and their parents at the racecourse development in Greenham who find themselves in the catchment area of Park House in Wash Common, which is by no means their nearest school, and would be affected if and when the huge Sandalford development in Wash Common goes ahead?
Well, Councillor, as I said, we do constantly review catchment areas, and in general, we have very few complaints or challenges from parents relating to catchment areas. And you have to bear in mind that choice of school is made by parents. Catchment areas only are used to prioritise the allocation of places.
Thank you both. Can we move on then, please, to item or question R, which is Councillor Vickers to Councillor Bowick.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. Recognising that low-income families may have reduced access to travel options, the DFE fund extended eligibility to free transport, where pupils are entitled to free school meals or when their parents are in receipt of maximum working tax credit if the nearest school, the nearest suitable school is beyond 2 miles for children who are over the age of 8 and under 11, if the school is between 2 and 6 miles, if aged 11 to 16 and there are not 3 or more suitable nearer schools, and if the school is between 2 and 15 miles and is the nearest school preferred on the grounds of religion or belief. That's for children aged between 11 and 16. We manage these arrangements locally. So we do, through the DFE fund, support children who need the transport when they're disadvantaged.
Do you have a supplementary?
Thank you for that answer, Councillor Björk. For those families that don't qualify for free transport but are still struggling, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm listening.
All right, so you're putting a face. I wondered if you couldn't hear me.
No,
right,
I can hear you. I might need to start again now because I've forgotten what you said at the beginning.
Right, for those families that don't qualify for free school transport but who are still struggling, is there a possibility that they could pay their fees by instalment? Is that something that's considered, or is that just too complicated? Because some families are borderline.
Presumably you're talking about our fair payer scheme. Is that what the question's about?
I'm not quite sure of that term. Fair person.
I would guess so, Councillor Bowick, from what Councillor Vickers has said. I would suggest that's what she's asking.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Vickers, if families are in financial difficulty, then they can make an appeal to the council, to the education service, and we'll always do what we can to help them.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you.
Can we move on then to T on our agenda this evening, which is Councillor Barnett to Councillor Wollaston.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. The officer and I have rather struggled over this question. The press release that was issued suggests there will be further contact with local authorities, show them how they'll be able to access funding. We propose to ask community groups where they think these facilities should go and approach other companies as well to improve the overall coverage. As far as I'm aware, this has not been followed up with a press statement. But when they do, we will be able to fill in the expression of interest form. I'm sorry not to be able to shed more light on this government initiative at this stage, but you may be able to enlighten me further with a supplementary.
Well, thank you, Councillor Wollaston. You actually did make a couple of observations which are part and parcel of the supplementary. My understanding is that this 30 million is going to be devolved to lead authorities, and obviously I looked upon West Berkshire Council as the lead authority, but in turn, obviously, what my question was going to be was how you were going to try and ascertain the amount of interest that would be from the town and parishes that might wish to tap into that fund. So you did partially answer it, that you would obviously have to consult with these subgroups to establish what they might be hoping to achieve out of the fund. So I watch this space, Councillor Wollaston, and I'm sure you do as well.
As do I.
Okay, thank you both. Then we move to question V, which is Councillor Vickers to Councillor Stewart.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Vickers. This council does publish draft minutes of public meetings, and these are published as soon as they become available. I would imagine the reason for your question is that there have been occasions over the last few months where for some meetings, the draft minutes have not been published as promptly as the public and members have a right to expect. This situation has been partly created by the impact of COVID-19, where, like many services across the council, as we heard earlier, have been called upon to support a number of additional activities and recovery meetings, and in particular the Democratic Services team and some of that team who will be supporting us tonight have absolutely had to deal with very many more situations than they normally would have done, supporting things like recovery, gold and silver meetings, the local outbreak engagement board. I could go on. But also, as discussed at the last executive, we know that this area is being reorganised at the moment, and there are a number of vacant posts which need to be filled, and the aim is to create a smoother and much more efficient service in future. I want to reassure you that I am pressing for the outstanding minutes to be published urgently on our website. I've been assured that the service director has this as an urgent task, and indeed have confirmed to me just today that they expect the situation to be rectified over the next couple of weeks. I would like to say, though, that until the area restructure is complete and all positions are recruited to, realistically, there may be some further delays, but these will be kept to a minimum wherever possible. And I also just wanted to point out, again, in terms of this meeting that we're at today, it's really important to note that if the public want to see how their elected representatives debated the important matters which they were elected to decide, meetings of council are available to watch on YouTube. And we know that we've had a huge number of the public taking advantage of this fact. So a real positive of the pandemic situation is that now we have far more people being able to view the meetings and to see what we debate and discuss. Thank you.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Vickers?
Thank you. Yes, just a brief one. I'm slightly concerned about what you say at the end. I fully agree that it's good that lots of people can watch, but can you reassure me that the fact that more people can watch us live, as it were, or even in recorded, is not going to mean that getting back to what is the normal standard, which I think is 10 working days when we should get the draft minutes published and available on the website, that is the priority, that notwithstanding the positive sides of this form of meeting, that we should stick to our standards, and you will not put the one ahead of the other?
I can absolutely assure you, and I'm sure Councillor Wollaston will also take up that mantle when this becomes part of his portfolio. But absolutely, I've had these discussions with the service director, and the aim is for that good service to return.
Okay, thank you both. Can we therefore move on to item D on our agenda this evening?
Councillor Marsh, I'm obviously your favourite executive member tonight. Our plans focus on the needs to encourage active travel and the use of public transport in line with our wider environmental targets. This will include park and ride and direct links with both the bus and train stations in line with the sporting calendar. We do, however, acknowledge that this will not be possible in all cases, and I've put together a comprehensive traffic management plan which looks more widely at the areas in terms of off-site parking. There will be secure bike storage, and we are exploring the possibility of charging points for electric vehicles. Various discussions are underway which will provide ample overflow car parking, but I'm not at liberty to reveal these at present until negotiations are completed. In summary, we do not anticipate that the new sports ground will significantly increase congestion or create parking issues for nearby residents. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do. And before I put my supplementary, can I just say I'm sorry that to have to table quite so many questions, and I'm doing it because this is my only opportunity really to raise the issues such as the one you've just replied to that residents are raising, including members of the rugby club. And in the absence of the proper debate about this, which
Councillor Marsh, we did talk about this. Could we have your supplementary question? If we're to get through all of your questions, we need to keep going. I've got 9 minutes
unfair.
left.
I was trying to explain to members something that might be a benefit, which is that, and then I was about to add, Councillor Doherty, that I'll try and combine some of these questions and reduce the number of supplementaries to make it move a little bit brisker. But we don't have a debate, any opportunity to debate this matter at all. So this is why, as you said to me yourself at the last executive meeting, this is why I have to put my questions to the executive. In terms of question D, Councillor Wollaston, and you are my favourite member, thank you for that. Tonight anyway, until your portfolio changes. When there's already a lot of congestion now, when there's a big rugby match or when there's a rugby festival towards the end of the season, are you really sure that all these things that you're talking about are going to happen? Because already there are problems, particularly in Heather Gardens, which is not suitable for anybody to park in. They still get a lot of people parking there. Have you sort of modelled how that will be affected?
We have modelled it, and we are, as I say, in discussion with some solutions, which I'm not at liberty to disclose at the moment, but I think we will have a satisfactory result which will solve the problems of the local residents.
Thank you.
Okay, can we move on then to question E, which is from Councillor Marsh to Councillor Wollaston.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh again. The council will ensure that all appropriate steps are taken to avoid any light nuisance to neighbouring properties. Modern LED floodlights are very directional, significantly reducing light pollution, so there should be little or no impact on residents. We have started an ecological survey, which will be part of the planning process, and nothing has been identified at this stage that gives any cause for concern. We do not feel that the proposals will add any new issues to the site. Do you have a supplementary?
No, thank you for that.
Can we move on then to item F on our agenda this evening, which is Councillor Marsh to Councillor Wollaston.
Councillor Marsh, I think my answer is the same as to your question D.
That's fine. That's
okay. Fine. Can we move on then to question G on our agenda this evening?
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. In a single word, yes. The ground is to be built to step 6 requirements with the ability to go to step 5. The uninitiated, that includes stands, fencing, floodlights, turnstiles, male, female and official changing facilities. Currently, this would help Newbury FC and Newbury ladies, who are both looking to progress to this level and beyond. The site plan is being designed to find the right balance between financial sustainability and ambition, looking at ways to allow progression up to step 4, and I'm now being assured that is achievable. This involves our consultants and the rugby club looking at most cost-effective ways to accommodate up to 1,000 people. We see this as a medium to long-term ambition for the clubs of Newbury, but not short-term. In terms of rugby, the ground will offer superior training options for their teams with the ability to play matches when needed. This will all be managed through the collective schedule assisted by our colleagues at Sport England, the RFU and the FA. Have a supplementary, Councillor Marsh.
Yes, only that if the football club, the senior football club playing at this ground were to achieve 2 promotions, which is not that outlandish, it's happened at clubs all over the country, they'd be in step 4, the same level at which Thatcham Town competes. So it's not that far-fetched. And you are saying that you think this ground could cope with the requirements for step 4?
I'm being assured it can be, and it could possibly go beyond that.
Okay, thank you both. Can we move on to item H then on our agenda, which is Councillor Marsh to Councillor Wollaston?
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. The council are working to agree a 40-year lease. This is in the long-term interests of local sports clubs, and there'll be clauses within the agreement that ensure the partnership is built on trust and mutual desire to provide great facilities for the people of Newbury and surrounding areas. Both parties see this as a community project that will last for decades. Do you have a supplementary?
No, I don't. Thank you.
And finally this evening, question I, which is Councillor Marsh to Councillor Wollaston.
Thank you finally, Councillor Marsh. The council is always looking at ways to improve the amount of space that can be dedicated to community sport. As with any land near larger populations, our need is in direct competition for other land uses such as housing and commercial buildings. The playing pitch strategy approved by this administration in February 2019 clearly states a commitment to 6 3G artificial pitches across the district and a 10-year planned timescale. We also accept that there's a shortage of good quality grass pitches, and we have already commissioned a report to identify pitches which can be enhanced through design drainage schemes, for example, and be suitable for competitive community football. I expect to be able to make further announcements on this in the autumn, ready for playing in spring 2020, but this will certainly involve pitches in Newbury. Our intention has been quite clear. It is to provide Newbury with the very best football offer that it has ever had. Do you have a supplementary?
Not really, just I can recommend a very good grass pitch or potentially good grass pitch in the centre of town, but let's not get into that debate again. And thank you for your...
That's not one that's on the list, Councillor Marsh.
Thank you for your patience, Councillor Wollaston, in answering.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Members, that concludes this evening's members' questions, and actually that concludes the business for this evening. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank everyone for your attendance. Can I remind you and ask you all to remain in your seats and wait for the live stream to cease before you actually leave the meeting. I therefore declare that this meeting of the executive is closed. So thank you all for your attendance.